there, welcome back to the Non-Serviam podcast. Today in the internet studio is someone that I know from real life and from the internet because she's such an internet staple on every social media and her blog and things like that. And that is Maggie McNeill. This is very exciting. I've never interviewed her before.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome. I'm going to read, I gotta tout you and read the bio. All right. So Maggie was a librarian in suburban New Orleans, but after an acrimonious divorce, she took up sex work. From 1997 to 2006, she worked first as a stripper, then as a call girl and a madam. She eventually married her favorite client and retired to a ranch in Oklahoma, but returned to escorting part-time in 2010 and full-time in 2015 after another divorce, this time amicable. And a move to Seattle, which, are you there now?
Yes. I mean, well, not in Seattle. I'm west of Seattle.
Somehow I didn't know that, even though I knew you were in the possibly better coast. Probably.
Yeah, I'm about 2 hours from Seattle if there's no traffic.
Okay, I've never been to Washington.
I am a country girl. I've always been a country girl, really. I mean, living in New Orleans. New Orleans used to be called the biggest small town in the world. So it's not really like living in a city. Living in Seattle was definitely kind of a little bit of a culture shock. And I definitely wanted to get back out to the country as soon as I could. So I did.
I do. I like the country. I prefer to be a country girl, though I'm in almost suburbia city. It's a bad medium ground. Oh my goodness.
You're not where you were when we met in person back in 2014, though. You're not still there, are you? That's your mom's house.
Yeah, you came to my mom's house.
Yeah.
With Ma, who I brought home.
Up on the top of the hill.
Yeah, they moved from there to a tiny West Virginia town, which is also at least nice and quiet.
Yeah, it's nice. It's nice here. You know, where I'm about 10 miles off the Pacific Ocean. And it's one of those country neighborhoods where your neighbors are close enough to call on in an emergency, but not close enough to overhear.
That's good.
Unless they run a chainsaw. If they run a chainsaw, you can hear that.
Those do travel. Oh my goodness. Okay. So since 2004, I feel like I should stop doing third person because we're already chatting now. Maggie over there has been a sex worker rights activist, and since 2010 has written the Honest Courtesan blog. Still blogging, which is good because we should probably get back to that in life. It's a daily blog which discusses sex work, politics, anarchism, philosophy, and a bunch of other topics. She has been published in venues such as Reason and the Washington Post, gives innumerable lectures, talks, radio, and video interviews, and is frequently consulted by academics and journalists as an expert on sex work. All right. We did it.
Yay.
It's a long and well, we like to start, I guess, kind of how, if I accosted you and demanded to know how you identify politically, what would you tell me?
If you accosted me in the street?
Or in an elevator, I guess, like because
if you accosted me in the street, I might say, who are you and why is it your business?
That's true. That's fair.
I don't like labels, Lucy. I really don't. I mean, the most accurate label probably would be minarchist.
Okay.
But the problem, of course, with that term, as you may have noticed yourself, is that when you use minarchist, people go, monarchist? I'm like, no, not monarchist. So I always say a minarchist an anarchist as an agnostic is to an atheist.
That makes sense. Yeah, I like that. That works.
Right? I'm just like, I'm not convinced that, I mean, in my purest heart, I'm an anarchist, but I don't trust human beings that much. So I think at this stage in our evolution, we still need some government. I just think we have a tendency to rely on it for too much. I mean, one of the examples I used way back when was chemotherapy. I mean, I think everybody knows that chemotherapy is difficult and expensive, and it really wears the body down. It makes a person sick. It is useful against cancer. But the
Mm-hmm.
way that our society responds to government, it's as if the doctors were running around giving chemotherapy for the common cold or anything else.
Okay. Yeah,
You know,
that
so I
makes
think it's
sense.
useful. I mean, I think government is useful in some ways, but I think we have a tendency to go to it too much.
I I have almost in some ways more of my life in public realms. I wear a minarchist hat, and I don't think there's a contradiction between anarchism making sense philosophically and working with what's happening now and what's available. I mean, I think that's reasonable.
Well, sure. I mean, it's the world's not perfect, and we do have to make compromises. I mean, we do have to. There is the way we would like the world to be, and there's the way the world is, and they're not the same. I mean, it's like one of the arguments I use with people who think that extending the human lifespan would be an unambiguously good thing. Didn't you and I interact with this recently? I think you and I talked about
We
this.
did, and we have in the past, and I'm quite interested because you are obviously a big sci-fi fan, but you
Mhm.
have a an issue with the idea of extended lifespans, or functional immortality. And I was going to pester you about that if it made any sense in
And
the
here we
interview.
are, you see. So it does make sense. But no, it's because the way I think, it's like, this is the thing: the human brain canalizes at about the age of 28 to 30. So after that, it's really difficult for a person to change. And I mean, we've all seen this, right? Back
Mhm.
in when I was young, all the hippies were wearing buttons that said "Never trust anybody over 30."
Yeah.
Um, and of course, it's because the brain tends to become kind of fixated. I mean, I've observed that in my own life. I've watched myself become more rigid in my thinking. And yes, with some effort, you can kind of say, no, I'm going to try to be open minded about this. But most people don't do that. And so,
Hmm.
I mean, look at the situation we're in now, where we're being ruled by these geriatrics. And can you imagine if those geriatrics that were ruling us had all been born before the Civil War?
Yeah.
I mean, well, of course, given all the crazy white supremacist shit going on, maybe it wouldn't be much different, but
And
but
there's
the
always like,
entire ruling class would be that way.
it's true. And the odd morally conscious people from the olden days were not usually the ones in power, so it's not
That's
like
right.
we'd be getting Congressman Frederick Douglass or someone,
No,
some,
exactly. It'll
yeah.
be the same. And I think as long as that is true, and we don't have a minarchist government. I mean, if we had a minarchist government, it wouldn't so much matter if a bunch of old fogies were in control, because they wouldn't have the power to damage much. Um, but I just think it's those two things that don't go together. You can have either um, an extended useful life, or you can have big, strong, powerful central government, but you can't really have both unless you want the evil empire.
Yeah, and I guess some people turns out do.
Well, I mean,
Um,
think about it too. I mean, even in science fiction and fantasy, you often see this theme, this motif of this, ancient undead being is the king or whatever. You know what I'm saying? And
yeah,
he's ruled for 2,000 years. Oh, and like in Dune, right? Leto, Emperor Leto ruled for like 3,000 years or something.
I haven't gotten to Dune yet.
You ought to.
I'm more inclined to sci-fi than fantasy, and I always got the sense that Dune was both kind of with the
Yeah, it
whole
is. It is.
yeah.
It's a kind of Arthur C. Clarkean. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
I do like those, and I like Clark specifically. I love Rendezvous with Rama, for example, but that's a nice short read.
I did like I remember it's funny you mentioned that book because for some strange reason I was thinking about it when I was trying to go to sleep last night. I was
Okay.
thinking about Rendezvous with Rama and remembering when I read it when I was probably like, I don't know, 12 or something like that. And it was one of those books where I didn't want to put it down. I mean,
Yeah.
we were going to like visit my grandma or something, and I took it along with me and kept reading.
Yeah, that's a good one where I don't I don't know. There's a whole thing with human nature and risking that the ship is not, it's not hostile and they don't end up destroying it, and they but then we don't find out much about it. I know that there are sequels that Clark like halfway wrote, and a lot of people say don't bother, and you
I
know
agree. I agree.
it's
I
over
read the
explained.
others. I did read the others when I was a librarian,
Mm.
and they were not written by Clark. They were written by Gentry Lee, um, who was Clark's boyfriend at the time. And there's nothing
Mm.
wrong with that, but at the same time, it's kind of like, okay, you're giving this much younger man your characters and letting him, go to town on them. And Gentry Lee, I don't find is a very good writer.
Okay,
Not to
noted.
Clark level, I don't think. I mean, not, now Clark himself. I mean, I have some issues with Clark, and one of my big issues with Clark is that Clark depicts female characters in pretty much the same way Michelangelo did, which is to depict a male character and staple tits on them.
Mm.
You know, I mean, it's like you read a female character in Clark, and you can't be sure. It's like, well, she sounds exactly like the male characters. There's no distinction. And I think it's because Clark just, in his own life, he didn't have a lot of women in his life. He didn't really know how to depict female characters that well.
Well, you could, to me, you can do worse than that if their characterization is non-existent.
Yes,
Well,
yes, true enough.
um, well, to reverse engineer back questions. um, well, you clearly have been reading sci-fi for a million years. And did that influence your political intellectual journey at
Oh
all?
sure, oh sure. Um, I mean, whenever I have the chance, whenever I'm asked for recommendations, which, as a former librarian, you get asked for book recommendations, it happens.
Sure.
Um, I tell people that The Moon is a Harsh Mistress by Heinlein is the finest political novel ever written.
Okay.
I absolutely believe, and it was one of those books that really did alter my thinking. You know, it's not to say that I went in being like a fan of big government and came out being again. It's not, no, not like that. But I'm talking about it shaped the tendencies I already had,
Hmm.
and it gave me some ideas that I have since repeated on my own. You know, not claiming they're mine, but you know what I'm saying. Saying,
Hmm.
well, Heinlein proposed in Moon is a Harsh Mistress that blankety blank.
Yeah, I need to reread that. It's been a long time.
It's
Heinlein
really
is
really
so
good.
Heinlein is weird because he's all over the place, and he seems enlightened, and he seems like a big old space pervert in a good way, and then in an excessive way. He was all over the place.
I mean, Heinlein, I mean, Heinlein's entire oeuvre, has a lot of political stuff in it. I mean,
Hmm.
there's very few Heinlein novels, certainly, that don't have a political component of some sort. I mean, sometimes it's more subtle, you know. Um,
I really love the Puppet Masters, which you could
yes,
slap a political interpretation on, but it's not. as obvious as like The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, I don't think.
No, not nearly, not nearly. And I want to interject at this moment actually that um, everybody seems to hate the movie of the Puppet Masters. I didn't think it was that bad. I mean,
Is everybody me? Because I hate it.
many
So,
people, many people say they hate it. And I mean, what I did was seriously right after I saw the movie, I said, I got to reread the novel and see how close they stuck. And I mean, I think they stuck fairly close in this. The most major change to me, the most important change, was moving it from Heinlein's fictional future history into a world more closely resembling our own, where we didn't have colonies on Venus in the 1970s.
right.
Well,
And
you see
it's,
that with Star Trek too, right? And I want to shake these people. It's like you see these people that are like they were all last year. They were the Bell riots and the Irish unification. I'm like, yes, in the Star Trek world, where there were eugenics wars and commercial space travel in the 1990s.
yeah. And I don't
In
know when
that world, something happened in 2024. That doesn't mean it's going to happen in your world.
people like to. I always thought it was funnier when a sci-fi movie in like 1993 was set in the future of like 1999 or something.
Yes,
Oh,
yes,
you
yeah.
gotta give yourself more room to work.
You do, and this is. I mean, I dearly love the Twilight Zone,
Mhm.
but that was one of Twilight Zone's. Whenever they tried to do future stuff, Rod Serling, for some reason, liked setting it really close. I mean, there's a really one of the hour-long episodes in the fourth season, which is a really, really good episode, mind you, but it takes place on a starship in the year like 1994.
God, I don't remember the hour ones because they weren't on Netflix or something for years. So I don't remember the hour long ones at all. But
Most of the
yeah,
hour-long ones are most of them are padded.
yeah, that's what they
Most of them
say.
you watch them and you're like, yeah, this could have been a half-hour episode.
Yeah.
Um, but that particular one I was just mentioning, which is a Richard Matheson script called Death Ship. That one uses its hour effectively.
Well, Matheson was awesome, so I
Matheson
believe.
was. He was a great, and I mean, and one of the amazing things about that episode, and one of the reasons I encourage people to watch it, is that you get to see Jack Klugman playing against type. Because
He was
Jack
in a bunch
Klugman
of
usually,
episodes. Yeah.
well, I mean, he usually played ne'er do wells, right? He
Hmm.
played bookies and he played hard luck guys and stuff like that. And in this one, he's a frickin' starship captain.
I might have never seen that one at all. Honestly, I don't
It's
know.
it's really very good. It's really very good. It's also got Ross Martin in it, who's one of my favorite actors.
I don't think I know him.
Ross Martin was the guy who played. Well, this is probably before your time a little bit. He was the sidekick in the Wild Wild West.
Hmm.
Artemis Garden. He was the man of a thousand faces, and he was also a kind of a gadgeteer.
Okay. Um, I finally watched the Twilight Zone movie, even though I felt morally sullied by watching it.
Yes, yes.
Though
I,
the remakes of the two classic episodes weren't bad, especially the Terror at 20,000 feet one. I thought was pretty well made, but still, there's that whole killing children uh, miasma that hangs over the production. That's kind of a drag.
yeah, it's true. And I mean, I also thought that I thought their remake of Kick the Can, where they kind of, you know, like they try to make it realistic, and I'm like, Kick the Can was a fantasy. It isn't
Yeah,
supposed to be realistic.
that was aggressively sentimental, and supposedly because Spielberg was so bummed out by the whole uh, horrifying accident thing. I don't remember that episode super well. And
The
like
original one
the
or
little
the one in the movie?
the original one, it's been a long time. It was kind of an odd choice to adapt in some ways.
It was an odd choice to adapt because it is very sentimental, the original. I
Mm,
mean, um, but it's also following a theme you see in Serling a lot, which is people wanting to roll back the clock,
sure.
and that's in Serling over and over and over and over and over again. I mean,
Yeah. Also, the whole thing isn't the same without Serling in my book, because I do
no,
love
no,
his
no,
whole presence.
no, and even though by the fifth season, his writing was definitely dragging. He needed a
Mm.
break. He was under too much pressure because as Mark Scott Zicree, who wrote the Twilight Zone Companion, as he pointed out, by the fifth season, a lot of times when you had dialogue between two characters, it sounded like dueling Rod Serlings.
Yeah, you don't want that. You gotta,
No, you don't.
Um,
It's something I try to avoid in my own writing. In my own writing, I try to avoid, two characters sounding alike. It's one of the reasons I think that I often try to I'll have long conversations with no he said, then he said, whatever. I'll just have the because I'm forcing myself to make the characters sound different enough to where you don't need the Joe said, then Sally said. You know what I'm saying?
that makes sense.
You know.
Well, as much as I would definitely talk about the Twilight Zone all day, I don't know. I guess actually, since we're talking about creative stuff, and I'm actually a little less clear on your time as a librarian, and because librarian stuff has been in the news the last couple of years.
It has. It has. And if regular readers of my blog have seen me say many, many times, um, it seems that I was fated to be threatened with state violence regardless of my career path.
Yeah, I guess so.
Right? Because I mean, like, there were many times when I was an escort where I kind of thought to myself, boy, I wouldn't have been dodging cops if I was a librarian. Well, ha ha ha, fool me.
Yeah, and I thought that, oh, it's banned books week, kids, was just like a cute kind of throwback thing,
Right?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, when I first started if you look back at my old Banned Books Week columns from, 2010, 2011, 2012, it's basically, yeah, this is mostly an academic exercise, but let's not forget.
Yeah.
And then in the mid-teens, all of a sudden, it's becoming something different. And one of the things I think is really interesting. One of them, I think the column was called Moral Climate. It was one of my Banned Books Week columns from mid-teens sometime. And I started it by saying, we are living in the past of Fahrenheit 451. Because what a lot of people will say, and Bradbury got very incensed when people would say this, that Fahrenheit 451 is about censorship. And he said, no, it
Mm.
isn't. It's not about censorship because it's not the government coming in and saying, oh, you can't read this. It's people have lost interest in reading because they're too busy watching their TVs and listening to the radios and all that. And they don't want to be bothered by thoughts that are disturbing.
Isn't
And
that a
that's what,
little
yeah, I
um
mean, that's what's going on, right? Because, I mean, there's a speech that Montag's boss gives him where he
yeah.
says, he says that Black people don't like Little Black Sambo, burn it. White people don't like Uncle Tom's Cabin, burn it. And he goes through a whole
Oh
list and
yeah,
he's
yeah.
saying, this is
Hmm.
how we achieve peace. We get rid of everything that people argue about. So it's not a top-down censorship, it's a lateral censorship. It's a socially demanded censorship. And of course, a few years ago, when we started hearing the whole thing of like college students not wanting to read books that might upset them, I immediately started thinking of Fahrenheit 451, you know.
Yeah, that I had forgotten that particular speech. That does seem more prescient than I realized.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
And you know the if you one of the things that's also scary if you remember Fahrenheit 451 is that he predicted omnipresent TV screens
yep, that's
playing
true.
ads at you.
Yeah,
And of course, now we're starting to see that, right? I mean, I have to
yeah,
go, you know, sometimes if I fill up at a gas station with screens, I have to go back in the car because I don't want to sit there being bombarded with a commercial while I'm trying to fill my car up.
yeah. Advertisers have not either they've read too much sci-fi or not enough. And
Not enough, right? It's like
yeah,
that internet joke about um, we have created the torment nexus from the classic sci-fi novel. Don't create the torment nexus.
yes, that's one of the all-time tweets, I believe. That's
It is. It's beautiful. It is absolutely beautiful.
um now I'm just thinking about Fahrenheit 451 more.
Well, I mean, it's it's again, like I said, it's people not wanting to be bothered, and so basically the government steps in and says, "Oh, that's what you want? Okay, we'll give it to you good and hard."
It's true. Though I'm immediately thinking of um the guy observes in the beginning of Fahrenheit 451, the guy who like lets himself be burned along with his books, I
Yes,
believe.
yes,
So you have people have said the same about Brave New World. That was that whole Neil Postman thing where, but there is government tyranny wrapped up in the self anesthetizing society as well
of
in,
course.
in both those cases. So
Yeah,
we
of
didn't
course.
do it all to ourselves, but
No,
in
no, no,
those
no,
cases,
no. But you don't feel in Fahrenheit 451 that this is. I mean, in Brave New World, there's definitely a feeling that this was imposed top down, and that
and there's
they,
yeah.
you know, that they made people happy in order to not have a revolution, but it didn't start that way. It was imposed, you know. Um, and because they, well, right, when they start doing the conditioning before they even come out of the bottle, so to speak,
Right.
you know, they start the conditioning right away. So of course, you know, within one generation, you don't have any malcontents, or not very many anyway. Um, but in 451, you definitely have more of a feeling that it is a government more closely resembling our own.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Not necessarily maybe a democratic republic, but close enough.
Or whatever we have um, right now.
Yeah, whatever it is we have, that's true.
What? Yeah.
I think I was saying back in the 80s that we had transitioned to a syndocracy, which is a form of government in which the officials are picked by groups. So each group, each syndic, throws its weight behind whatever candidate. So, you know, and some of the syndics are special interest groups, some of the
Mm.
syndics are unions, some are corporations, some are, you know, whatever. Um, and the example I used to use in those days was, you know, the tobacco companies that, you know, that Jesse Helms was going to vote with the tobacco companies regardless. He was their boy, you know.
Yeah.
And as time went on, we have, I mean, much more and more and more of that. You know, prison guard unions, police unions, teachers unions,
Yeah.
Mothers Against Drunk Driving, the all these post-Christian churches. They all have their own representatives. So I mean, yeah, we still have the form of a republic, but I mean, this is of course before Trump. I don't know what we've
Yeah.
got right now. Honestly, I don't know what to call it.
Yeah. That's a fair assessment. Well, in
And
terms of,
no, go ahead.
I was gonna say, in terms of early influences, did you have any nonfiction, more concrete political, philosophical influences? Did you read any of the sort of the obvious, like the libertarian standards or any other type of thing?
Not early.
Mm.
Not early. When I was in college, I casually dated. And when I say casually dated, I mean it was like, we went out and we did stuff, but neither one of us had the illusion that we were in love with each other or anything like that. We just were friends, and he happened to be a guy and I happened to be a girl.
Hmm.
Uh, and he was a grad student. He was 28 when I was 18, so he was 10 years older than me. And he introduced me to. He did a lot of my early, I should say, early adult. I'm saying I'm not. No, it was not teenage stuff, but he was the first one actually to force me to question the whole left right thing.
Okay.
That he was the first one that said, well, what does this mean? What really think about this? And he was right, and he made me see. It's like, you're right. What difference does it make with the excuse a person? It's the old, when the boot on your, there's a boot on your neck. It doesn't matter whether it's a right or a left boot. It's a boot.
That's
And
true.
he gave me a copy of The Fountainhead. He got me to
Ah,
read The
okay.
Fountainhead. Um, and I personally, and of course the diehard Randians, may disagree, but I personally think The Fountainhead is the book that best explains Rand's philosophy way more than Atlas Shrugged. Um, Not only for the simple reason that it's a hell of a lot more readable.
I've heard that. I have
I mean,
given
The
up on Atlas
Fountainhead,
Shrugged.
yeah, Atlas Shrugged is oh my god, it's like Moby Dick.
Yeah.
It's digressions and it's just overcomplicated and overlong, and Fountainhead is pretty concise. It follows one person, and um, it's a good story in addition to being it's not just a philosophical treatise.
Right.
And I mean, have you ever seen the movie with Gary Cooper?
I never have actually.
it's not a bad movie. It's not a bad movie at
Mm.
all. And Rand herself wrote the screenplay. So I mean, Gary
I
Cooper and
never.
Patricia Neal. Patricia Neal is Dominique.
Is she the one who was married to Roald Dahl, or did I make that up?
Patricia Neal. Oh, maybe I don't remember
That's
whether she was or not. I do not.
that's
I do not.
apropos of truly nothing. Never mind. I just.
She's the woman who's in her possibly two most famous roles. She's the woman who becomes friends with Klaatu, the alien, in Day the Earth Stood Still.
Okay.
She's the one who
That's
has to
enough.
deliver the message to Gort. She's the one who has to say Klaatu Barada Nikto, Um,
Oh damn! I didn't remember that.
and the other famous role she is in Breakfast at Tiffany's. She is Audrey Hepburn's boyfriend, who is a male escort. Um, she's his client,
Oh, okay.
and she's wonderful in there as a. She's just one of these hard as nails ladies. She knows what she wants. it's not about emotions. It's about, this is what I want, and this is what,
That is one of those movies that when I first watched it as a tween, probably I missed all of this, all of the sex work stuff. Somehow I didn't fully grasp, and it's not really very subtle at all. I just sort of missed.
it's not, but you'd be amazed how people don't see what they want to see. I mean, I remember when I listed that movie in a list that appeared on my blog, 10, 12 years ago or so, um, about movies about sex workers. And I mentioned
Mhm.
that one. And I got some pushback, and I'm like, what do you think? $50 for the powder room?
I was gonna say, when I was like 11 or 12, I didn't quite grasp it. That
Yeah.
aspect. That's an interestingly like oblique phrase. But in the beginning, when she's paying, what's his name, and there's this uncomfortable air because
Yeah.
he's kind of ashamed. There, I remember thinking I was like almost there, understanding. But $50 for the powder room is a little. But the whole picture, yeah, if you're an adult, you should be able to figure that out at least when you're watching.
You should be able to, but people don't. And another one people don't get is My Fair Lady.
I haven't seen that since I was very small, but that's
Yeah,
interesting.
they don't recognize Eliza Doolittle as a street girl, and they're like, oh, but she's a flower girl, and I'm like, you do understand, right, that selling flowers was an excuse to be on the street, so that if a cop harassed you, you say, but I'm just selling flowers.
Specifically flowers, more like
Flowers
and
or oranges or any
uh,
number of things that basically gave them an excuse to be on the street and to pretend to be making their money by a different way than they're actually making it.
okay. I mean
I
that
mean, you
makes
can't,
sense.
even in Victorian times, you could not make enough money from selling flowers to support yourself at all.
Yeah.
At all. So it's like, no, the flowers were the excuse to tell the cops if the cop comes along and tries to bother you. You know,
All right. Well, that admittedly is slightly a revelation to me, but I also specifically don't remember My Fair Lady very well.
well, you're also not a hooker. I mean, it a lot of things become obvious when you're in it. It's like you look at it and you go, "Oh,
Do you have other movies that you think portray it well, or like
I do."
horrible
And it's funny
cliches that
because,
drive you crazy?
well, there's that. I will say this: most of the movies I find that um, treat that are talking about a sex worker as a sex worker, and they're presenting her, and it's unambiguous.
Hmm.
Most of those movies I find, um, I don't care for. There's a few exceptions. Never on Sunday. The heroine in Never on Sunday is absolutely a sex worker. They don't mince words,
I
and
don't know that one.
it's she's Greek. She's a Greek sex worker, and every Sunday she throws a big party, for all her friends. So she doesn't work on Sunday, which is what the title comes from.
Hmm.
And the movie is in Greek and English, no subtitles,
Hmm.
because it's, the Greeks are speaking Greek and the Americans are speaking American, and this guy whose name is Homer, uh, he basically tries to save her.
Hmm.
He comes along and basically he's trying to rescue her from sex work. And at first she kind of goes along with it, and then eventually she's like, "Fuck this."
So a different Pretty Woman, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very different. And he's and it's a lovely movie because she's a funny character. Like, one of the things that he gets upset about is that she loves to go to see the ancient tragedies, Sophocles and things like
Hmm.
that. But in her mind, she reinterprets them to have happy endings.
Hmm.
And this makes Homer crazy. But there's a tragedy. And she's like, no. They all went to the seashore at the end.
I say I can't think of one that has a happy ending that I'm aware of, but there
No,
might
lots
be.
of
I
freaking
don't know them
tragedies,
all.
right?
There might be one snuck in there, but not that I've ever heard of.
Yeah, but she's a funny character. But most of the movies that are about sex workers, qua sex workers, like Clute. I mean, everybody loves Clute. I don't think Clute was that great. I don't really care um, for the way the girl is depicted in there, and most of the time, because it's just too much tragedy porn,
Mm-hmm.
for the most part. So I find that most of the good, what I consider good sex worker portrayals, are more things like Breakfast at Tiffany's, where it is not spelled out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, One of my favorite portrayals, because it is very subtle, is have you ever seen the Ray Milland movie Lost Weekend?
No, though I'm aware of it.
It was my husband, as I call him. It was one of
Oh
his
yeah.
favorite movies. He loved that movie. um, and I'm not quite sure why exactly. He had some very unusual tastes in movies. Like, he just would like a particular movie for some reason. He couldn't necessarily put his finger on why. He just liked it. And so he got me to watch it. It was the first movie in which alcoholism was portrayed as a serious problem rather than just having the drunk be a comical character.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an escort in the movie who is sweet on Ray Milland, and it is not at all subtle. It is. Excuse me. It is not at all obvious. That was what I meant to say. It is
Mm-hmm.
extremely subtle. It's things like he makes a date with her, and then he gets drunk, and so he misses it. And later on, when she confronts him, she says, "I skipped a professional date for you."
Ah.
And there's also a scene where there's a kind of a little old, like a little old accountant type guy with spectacles, that sort of a character, and he's meeting her,
Okay. Yeah.
and she's a very pretty woman. So
Yeah.
obviously, this is, she's not dating him because she likes him. She's dating him because. So she's an interesting character because she's very well portrayed, and she's a rounded character, but it is never spelled out at any point. You just have to pick up on it.
Is that a Hays Code era? I would assume.
Yes, it is. It is from the very early '60s. I want to say '61, something like that.
I'm suddenly remembering. Have you ever seen 10 Cents a Dance?
I have
It's
never seen that one in particular. I do not believe.
that's
Um,
Barbara Stanwyck, and it's like almost Hays Code, but we're not there yet.
oh, you sure
And she,
you don't mean Babyface?
mm-mm. It's like early 30s,
Yeah,
and she dance. I forget what they call her is the euphemism, but she dances with men for money.
Taxi Dancer.
Yes, and there's this whole thing where she marries a poor guy who's kind of awful about everything, and at the very end she ends up with a rich guy after a divorce. Even she's not punished for any of her terrible indiscretions, and she ends up with a nice rich man as opposed to a nasty poor one. It's an
Well,
interesting
and
movie.
Babyface is also she's a sex worker, and Babyface, and because it is pre-code, they are blunt about it. I mean, blunt. Like, her dad owns a seedy tavern,
Hmm.
and the mom is nowhere. Mom was either dead or took off or whatever. I don't remember. It's been a while, but they flat out say, they don't use the word pimp,
Hmm.
but her dad has been pimping her out to his better customers since she was 14.
Oh dear.
Yeah, I mean, it's flat out.
Hmm.
And what happens is there's a regular patron of the bar who introduces her to Nietzsche and
Okay.
says, basically, you need to read this. You should use your feminine power over men. Stop letting your father and men use you.
Hmm.
You need to use them. And it's a revelation to her. And then she literally sleeps her way to the top. She goes to a bank, she gets a job at the bank, and she, she keeps trading up for as the supervisors take interest in her.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a really cool, I love the way they show, because even in those days, they didn't want to be obvious about it. So what they do is the bank is in a tall building, and every time she moves up, they euphemize it by showing the camera moves up the building and then zooms into
Yeah.
the new office. So
Mm-hmm.
she's literally sleeping her way up the corporate ladder,
And I assume it all turns out well for her.
It does turn out well in the end.
Good.
Yes, it does. There's a problem. Um, I think, yeah, she is genuinely, finally interested in one of the men, and there's a murder or something that she gets, but in the end, it works out.
So, kind of based on your past, I have to go to the horrible cliche of Pretty Woman, because I would assume most people are aware of it more than some of these movies. And there's this whole thing where it was supposed to be much more seedy in an original draft of it, and Julie Roberts was supposed to be on drugs and stuff. And a lot of people hate the quote unquote fairy tale ending. Like, she's not miserable as a sex worker, it seems like. Not, she's just kind of vaguely unhappy. And the fairy tale ending and Richard Gere, and it's all great. But you did marry a client.
I did.
So, I mean, I'm curious what you think about that movie, and in general, some of the misconceptions people have.
Pretty Woman, the thing about Pretty Woman is it's very funny when you listen to who's criticizing it
Mm-hmm.
and what their criticism is. So I'm not saying that Pretty Woman is one of my favorite movies or anything. I don't think I even own a copy of it. But it was a Disney movie, for goodness sake.
Right.
I mean, what do you expect? Of course it's going to have a happy ending.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, Disney movies do. For God's sake, it's Cinderella.
Mm-hmm.
It's Cinderella. She's in a bad situation, and then the handsome prince comes along and saves her. Ta-da! But when you talk to prohibitionists problem with it isn't the fairy tale likeness of it. It is the fact that she's not a miserable caricature at the beginning of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
They think that she should be missing teeth and be, on meth and be, knifed by a pimp or something. This is what, and of course this is nonsensical. I'm much more prone to accept the criticisms of sex workers who say, well, I mean, for goodness sake, he marries her and takes her out of it.
Mm-hmm.
That criticism is a lot more valid than, oh, this movie is not entirely doom and gloom and paints this character as a caricature. How in the world, what kind of mind criticizes a movie for making its characters not caricatures?
That's true. That's well put.
I mean, I've always been preferred, characters who are more rounded, for goodness
Mm-hmm.
sake.
Can I get back to a real basic question?
Yeah.
And that is, what is sex work?
What is sex work?
Mm-hmm.
Sex work is years ago, somebody, I can't exactly quote it, but the basically it's selling your own erotic labor.
Okay.
Or the way that I have put it before is, if somebody pays money to you that he would not have paid you except for sexual interest,
Hmm.
you are a sex worker.
So fairly broad
Yeah. In other words,
definition.
if you're selling sex toys in an adult store, you're not a sex worker
Hmm.
because it's not your own erotic labor. You could just as well be handing pencils over the counter, or dishes, or
Hmm.
comic books, whatever. You're selling a thing, and it doesn't. If the thing happens to be sexual, so what? And I've had people try to quibble with that, and I'm like, so nowadays some drugstores have sex toys.
Right.
Does the clerk become a sex worker if you happen to buy one of those things? Of course not. It's a product. It's nothing to do with it, you know. But if you sell pictures, if you sell, in-person sexual services, if you're a stripper, if you make porn, um, phone sex, all those kind of things, those are all sex work. Now, what happens sometimes is, as a sex worker develops her career, she sometimes begins to get paid a lot of money for doing things that don't even look sexual to other people. I mean, I've
Okay.
pointed this out before, is that usually the more you get paid, the less sex you actually have to have.
That's interesting.
It's true though. It really is
Hmm.
true. When you're in the budget kind of bracket, the guy is looking for sex pretty much. That's what he wants. Boom, 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 and you're done. But once you get up to the guys paying for an overnight, he's not looking to screw all night long. He wants this entire experience. He wants to talk,
Hmm.
and he wants to cuddle, and he wants to, all the stuff together. And so you less of your time is spent doing things that are directly sexual.
Okay.
But I mean, but then you get these borderline cases. Like I remember, it was in my first year. It was within my first year of doing sex work. So this was probably beginning of 2001.
Hmm.
Um, one of the agencies I worked for called me and said, he goes, "Hey, I've got a guy who's looking for the most educated girl I have." And I said to him, "Would a master's degree do?" And he said, "Yes, so you're on. And the guy took me to dinner, and he said, "Well, I'm celebrating. I just graduated from university." And he was an older guy, so I think he had gone back. He wasn't
Hmm.
22 or anything. He was probably in his early 30s. And I said, "Well, what did you graduate in?" And he said, "Theology." And I
Wow.
said, "That's really interesting because just a few weeks ago, I just finished reading the Nag Hammadi library in English." And so we start
Dang.
talking Gnostic Gospels. Um, and we ate our dinner, and eventually went back to his hotel room. We still were talking. And then I realized what time it was. And I went, "Oh, we've only got like half an hour left. So if you want, you know, to do anything, we need to get moving here." And he goes, "Oh, I don't want that." And I'm like, "You don't?" And he goes, "No, no, no." He goes, "I'm getting married in a few weeks." He says, "So I don't want to cheat on my fiance." And I'm like, "Then why did you call an escort service?" He goes, "Because I hate to eat alone, and I would rather look at a beautiful woman than some dude."
Interesting. Okay.
I said, "Okay." So yeah, it's still sex work, right? Because
Right. Right.
he spelled it out. He was interested in. He wanted to look at something pretty, basically, while he was having a conversation in dinner. But that's not what most people would think of as sex work.
No, not so much.
I mean, I don't think we even held hands. We literally talked about philosophy and the history of religion and mystery religions and all that kind of stuff. You
Okay.
know,
Um. So beyond that, is there anything else that like the average bozo gets wrong about sex work? Like a big
I think
misconception or a...
I think the thing the number one problem, if you had to distill it all down, is that sex work is, as you said, it's a broad category. It's
Mhm.
extremely broad. But people want to take one particular segment of this broad picture and pretend that it applies to the entire picture.
Mhm.
So that very narrow segment is survival sex work,
Right.
street based survival sex work. You know, a girl, usually a girl or a grown woman who is in a bad situation of some sort. She's a runaway. She's addicted to drugs. She's fleeing abuse, something, and she's on the street and she's just trying to get by selling sex. And this is they take this segment of the, which is a very tiny piece of the, and I mean very tiny. I could not hazard a guess, but I will say that street-based sex work represents less than 10% of all sex
Mhm.
work. And survival sex workers are only a fraction of that. So I would say no more than, say, 2 to 3% maybe of sex workers are in that kind of a situation. And yet they want to take that 2 or 3% and pretend it is everybody,
Right.
which is, to kind of reverse it, it's like pretending that everybody in the military lives like 3-star generals.
Mhm.
They're a tiny fraction of the military life, and you use that to represent the whole. And of course, it's silly. It's completely silly. And the majority of, I think the majority of misconceptions about sex work derive from that one specific thing, either on purpose or through ignorance, representing a tiny minority as being the majority. And they will really defend their misconceptions vehemently. You know, they will deny that it's possible for anybody who does sex work to not be a miserable victim. And I have known a lot of sex workers in my life, and I guarantee you that they are pretty much as varied as anybody else. I have known
Sure.
sex workers that were very happy people. I have known sex workers that were very miserable people. I have known sex workers who worked really hard. I have known some who were quite lazy. You know, some that were brilliant, some that were stupid as a box of rocks. But this is everybody. This,
Mhm.
you could say that same thing about any other profession. You know, even medical doctors. I've met medical doctors and I'm like, how did you friggin' graduate medical school? You
That's
know,
true.
and so I mean, you run into it, right? I mean, you got the same could be said about lawyers, about teachers, about pretty much anything. You know, that you're going to have some of the people who are in it who are going to be, you know, happy. Some are sad. Some are miserable. Some are bright. Some are stupid. eh, You know, competent, incompetent, the whole 9 yards. Um,
I mean, what I feel like I see is just the idea that if there was any other option for employment, no one would choose this. And I've seen, I I feel like maybe you've sort of discussed in this framework, like if you work at Walmart or what is seen as a not very wanted job, like there's like, do you subscribe to the fact that like any kind of job is sort of selling your body in a sense?
Yeah, of course. I mean, right?
Hmm.
Because here's the thing. Why do we pay people? We pay people to get them to do something they wouldn't do otherwise. You know, there's only a very small segment of the population who are like, Paris Hilton, where, they become, I mean, because she went into acting and did acting, right? But she didn't have to do acting. She was doing acting as a hobby
Right.
because she's going to inherit the friggin' Hilton hotel chain. Eh, She didn't have to work. But how many people or fall into that category? Very, very few. The majority of us are not doing the thing we love. And so, of course, we got to be paid because otherwise, I mean, given my druthers, I would live on my farm, feed my animals, read books, watch a few shows, play D&D, cook, eat, visit with friends, stuff like that. That's what I would do.
Sounds good.
It
Sounds
is
very good.
great, but but
Hmm.
but where's the money?
Yeah.
And so you have to do something to bring money in, and so for most sex workers, the reasons they choose sex work is number one, it's quite lucrative for other low entry um, jobs. You don't need a
Yeah.
degree, you don't need a certificate, you don't need a license, you don't need permission, you don't need a boss, you don't need a workplace, you don't, what I'm saying? None of that. You can set up shop pretty much with just yourself.
Hmm.
So that's one. Number two, it's incredibly flexible.
Yeah.
Incredibly flexible. The story I like to tell people is this one girl that used to work for me, my escort service. When she started working for me, she was 28. She had two kids, uh, very, very, very small, and she had a useless ex-husband who was never on time on child support. And this girl was a morning person, and so this was her job. This was her way of doing it. She lived right next door to her mom. Her mom knew what she did. They had a
Hmm.
path that ran basically through the garden between the two back doors. And she taught her two little girls, if you wake up and mommy is not here, go next door to grandma's house.
Hmm.
And grandma knew what she did. And so she liked to work the really early shift because in New Orleans, there is a really early shift. It's these guys that basically have been all night at the bars or the casino or whatever, and they just got back and it's 4 o'clock in the damn morning and they decide they want a hooker. And she loved doing that shift. So she'd do like 2 sessions while I was sleeping. And I'd get up in the morning because my daytime operator was handling
Hmm.
it. I'd wake up in the morning and walk into the living room, and there would be an envelope right that had been pushed under my door with 2 agency fees in it. And I'd be like, "Oh, Missy must have done a couple this morning." But the thing for her that was the beauty of it was she did that shift. She could make $400, 200 or $400, and this is $200 or $400 in the year $2,000,
Yeah.
which was bigger, right? A lot more
Yeah.
money than now. She could do that before her little girls were even awake. And then she could spend the rest of the day with her kids, which is what she wanted. She could spend the day with her kids. She'd do her housewife stuff, She'd take her little girls to the zoo or whatever they wanted to do because they were preschool age, um, and it worked great for her, right? I had another one who was also divorced. She had two boys, and they were older. They were like 8 and 10, I want to say, and same thing, except her shift was while they were at school.
Mm-hmm.
So she only worked from 9 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon or whatever, you know, and that was when she worked. Most jobs are not that flexible.
No, they're not.
And most jobs, if you're not feeling good, you can't simply call and say, sorry, I'm not feeling good. I'm not going to work today. You know, I mean, I had college students, girls that were college students, who would call me and say, hey, look, I got finals this week, so I'm not going to work. And I'd be like, you get in there and you do your studying, honey. You know, and I mean, I remember one of them, she called in one night and I said, didn't you? She was a vet student. I said, don't you have exams tomorrow? And she's like, yeah. She goes, but I've been cramming for hours. She goes, my brain is tired. She goes, I just consider me on for the next 2 hours. If you get something during that time, give it to me. If it's after that time, I'm studying again. And I was like, well, okay, you know, but you better get back to studying, girl. And she's like, yeah, I will, you know. So, I mean, but again, flexibility, right?
Yeah, I mean, do you feel does the rest of the working world, like, could they learn something from this type of employment arrangement, I wonder?
I guess I think it would depend on what you were doing. I mean, I think some other jobs would lend themselves to it, like any
Mm-hmm.
kind of job that was, well, writing, for example. If you worked as an editor,
Mm-hmm.
if you worked as an editor and you're working by the piece, you know, edit this article and you get paid X amount for editing that article.
It's true, I've done just that.
Right? And then if you feel sick when you get up in the morning, you don't necessarily have to do it right away.
Mm-hmm.
You can say, no, I'm going to go back to bed and I'll do this when I get up, you know. And obviously, if you keep putting it off and putting it off, you know, the person you
I've also done that.
eventually call and say, what's going on here? You were supposed to have this yesterday, you know. Uh, but I mean, as long as you get your things done, and um, I've known sex workers who had chronic diseases that, again, you know, if they're feeling sick, they don't have to work that day, or whatever, you know, cancel your appointments or postpone them. I've known girls who had mental health issues of some sort, you know, like bipolar or whatever, and
Mm-hmm.
they, again, same thing, right? They can either postpone if they're having a really bad day, or they can say to themselves, it's just for an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And I've done that many times. You know, when I was going through my divorce, I did that. You know what I'm saying? There was times when I was just wanting to sit around and cry, and but I got some work, and I said, okay, I can psych myself into this, you know. And you put on your game face, you know, you do the old showbiz thing, you know, the show must go on. You go on, the guy has no idea that something's really bothering you, and then you get back out to your car and you immediately start crying again. Because, okay, done with the job now I can go back to crying about, you know, my husband leaving me.
There's something that a lot of people they're more troubled by that example than they would by going to Walmart and you work your 8 hours and pretend to be chipper for the customers and then you're sad when you get home. I feel like people are like, yeah, of course. But your example, there's something they find more sinister about that, I think.
Well,
As
that's
if
because they're trying
it's
to fit it
odd.
into that, right? They're trying to
Yeah.
fit it into that model,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and so it kind of reminds me of, you are way, way too young to remember the backward masking fad. Um, in the 80s, there was a thing where um, the religious fundamentalists were claiming that if you played heavy metal records backward, you would hear
Oh,
satanic
okay.
messages.
Yeah. Yeah.
So one and I was, at the time, right, I was learning to think critically. I was in college and just right after, and I was kind of developing this adult critical thinking, um, pattern. And I remember noticing that this guy that I was hearing in the radio, he played um, he played a cut from Stairway to Heaven,
Mm-hmm.
and then he said, "Okay," he says, "if you had trouble understanding the lyrics there, it was," and he read the lyrics after he played it. Then he said, "Now I'm going to play it backward, and what you will hear is," and he said what you were going to hear before he played it. And of course, that sets up your mind so that when he
Oh
plays
yeah.
it, you are looking for that. And so I think that's what a lot of these people, they, when they hear a story of a sex worker, they are not listening to see what she says. They have got an image in their mind of what they think she should be saying, and they're trying to
Mm-hmm.
force her story into that box, whether it fits or not.
Um, have you, since, well, say 2001, how do you think sort of the general attitude towards sex workers has changed, if at all? Has there been any improvements or backsliding?
Yes, is the big answer.
Makes
Improvements,
sense.
then backsliding, and then I think improvements again. What
Okay.
happened is, one of the things I point out is to use the example of Pretty Woman. Pretty
Mm-hmm.
Woman is the one they all grab on, but it was not a monolith. If you look at the late 80s and early 90s, there were lots of movies with positive sex worker characters. There was
Okay.
Pretty Woman. There was Risky Business. There was Milk Money. There was
Mm-hmm. That's
Dr.
right.
Detroit. There was Mighty Aphrodite. There were, I mean, just a plethora of these movies. And the sex worker characters would usually be fun and savvy and streetwise and good heart. They were definitely hooker with a heart of gold type characters. You know,
Sure.
uh, like in Risky Business, right? They kind of help the young boy to come of age, sort of thing. And there's another one where the hooker acts as like a matchmaker, you know. And so you have these kind of movies. And at the time, polls, because I mean I followed this, right? I
Mm-hmm.
was very interested in sex work even before I was doing it. Because I mean, I started doing sex work really, really early, as a kind of a dilettante. And that was when I was in school, when I was in college. And so in 85, 86, 87, I was kind of doing it. I didn't advertise or anything. It was sort of just like a real play it by ear sort of an arrangement. And then I got out of that because I fell in love and just stupidly married much too young.
Mm.
And then after that husband left me in 95, that was when I went back. But even, like I said, even when I was a librarian, I was interested in sex work issues. I mean, I kind of like identified sort of in part of my head as a sex worker. And so I read about it and I followed and I was interested in research and things. And at the time, the vast majority of people in polls would say that they thought basically the government should get out of people's bedrooms. They saw prostitution as a victimless crime. And so what happened, I think, if you look at the late 90s, you realize that all the anti-sex types, the Christian fundamentalists, the anti-sex feminists,
Mm-hmm.
they did not like the fact that society as a whole had become very blasé about sex work. They didn't like that sex workers were portrayed as not victims in movies. You
Mm-hmm.
know, again, Pretty Woman, right? They went nuts. They were absolutely ballistic about this because how dare Disney have a hooker in one of their movies? And so they realized that trying to argue that the government should interfere in people's business because they don't like it was a losing argument.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is why they came up with the whole sex trafficking nonsense. They went back to the beginning of the 20th century and they said, what happened the last time that, sex work was becoming, and of course the answer was that propagandists portrayed sex workers as universally downtrodden victims of evil men. And
Mm-hmm.
all they did was they just recycled this. What used to be called white slavery was now being called sex trafficking. And so they knew that if they could paint sex workers as being victims, people would not see sex work as victimless. And so this is when the whole pimps and Johns messaging all started. And that climbed throughout the aughts. Around 2008, cops realized that it let them pretend to be good guys.
Mm-hmm.
And so then it really took off. And so from about 2008 to about, I want to say 14 or 15, um, was the height of that sex trafficking hysteria. Where good grief, you remember, you could
Mm-hmm.
not friggin', if the word sex appeared in an article, it was going to be all about trafficking and all about, the victims and the pimps and all this stuff. And then around 2018, well, I think what happened was, honestly, with the whole Sesta Fosta thing,
Mm-hmm.
for listeners who might not remember those, it was a big law that basically tried to carve out an exception to Section 230 for sex work. That basically tried to say, well, Section 230 doesn't count if there's sex work involved in your website. And they use that as an excuse to decimate sex worker online advertising. And I think what happened is a lot of Americans don't like bullies, and they
Yeah.
saw that as bullying. And what happened was, all of a sudden, as soon as you had that law go in, I started seeing a much bigger number of pro sex work articles. Reporters who basically before had been happy to repeat the crap were now saying, wait, 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 wait. And I also think it lit a fire under a lot of sex workers who didn't really want to get involved. And I don't blame them. I don't blame anybody for not wanting to do their little thing and then just stay quiet. But a lot more sex workers realized at that time, I think, that, oh no, if we stay quiet, this will just get worse. And so
Sure.
that ramped up. And then, of course, the pandemic, that stole jobs from a lot of women. What did they do? OnlyFans had just appeared at the time. And so
Right.
that type of sex work became very popular and very fashionable. Um, and so I think that has shifted things. So now, yeah, you still have, I do twice a week, I do these news columns. And so, I see a lot of these, I've had my finger on the pulse of this moral panic for a long time now. And it's very funny now because when somebody is going to be, if somebody's going to be talking about sex trafficking stuff, it's nearly always going to be a Trumpist now. It's going
Yeah.
to
It
be,
ties into QAnon. It like very overt conspiracy.
yes,
Um, Less grounded, even if sort
yes,
of it was always exaggerated.
yes. It was always exaggerated, but it became completely insane. It became the whole, Hillary Clinton um, and Oprah Winfrey and Tom Hanks. I remember Tom Hanks was another one. They are kidnapping children and taking them, I swear this was a real thing, you can look on my blog and find it, taking them to Mars. There's a colony on Mars, and where they're terrifying them to create a chemical in their blood that prolongs life.
The
And I'm like,
adrenochrome, whatever the hell they
yeah, adrenochrome. But I'm like, what the hell, people? This wouldn't even make a good pulp science fiction story. This is terrible. This is like the worst episode of the X-Files. Like,
Yes.
but worse. I mean, what the hell?
I mean, is some of that just a direct satanic panic
Yeah,
echo?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Maybe we never really
Absolutely.
killed that.
No, we never did kill the satanic panic, really. It's just it went underground. And if you look at the satanic panic, we talk about the satanic panic like it was one thing. But actually, it keeps coming back over and over again. There was one in the early 70s that was a lot smaller and shorter. What had happened is that people had become, and it was partly due to the whole Age of Aquarius thing, people were becoming more interested in the occult and in, things like astrology and stuff like that. And so you started having a lot of movies because Hollywood followed, right? Hollywood doesn't lead. So you had The Exorcist, and you had The Omen, and you had Rosemary's Baby, and a bunch of these kind of movies. And
Right, yeah.
obviously, the holy rollers, as we used to call them in those days, went nuts. They went completely nuts. But it didn't become a big social phenomenon like it did 10, 12 years later in the Satanic Panic. But what the Satanic Panic was feeding on was, for the first time in the 80s, and it's kind of weird, some of your younger listeners, this may seem almost kind of like some kind of weird ancient history thing, but it's hard, I think, for younger people now to realize that the 80s were the first time when more women were working outside of the home than inside of it. In the 70s, when I was a
I'm not
kid,
surprised, but that's seems so recently for that to have happened.
it was
That's all.
very recent. It was recent. In the 70s, when I was a kid, if your mom worked outside the house, that was a cause for conversation. It was a topic of conversation. An old friend of mine once pointed out that when we were kids, if you said, so-and-so works out, you meant she worked outside of the house. She had a job as a secretary or a nurse or whatever. It didn't mean work out like go to a gym and do exercises.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, the meaning of that term shifted. But in the 80s, for the first time, you had huge numbers of women in the workforce and bringing their kids to daycare.
Right.
And so what happened was there was this subtle fear, this paranoia about daycare among a lot of these women. Felt guilty. They felt like, well, why do I have to, my mom didn't work outside the house. Something must be wrong with me for doing this. Like a subtle guilt. And, that kind of guilt, anything will feed it.
Yeah.
So the Satanic Panic fed on that paranoia and that worry about what is happening in daycare when we're not there.
But then there were
What are
actual
they doing to my precious
casualties.
baby? And I mean, I remember when the whole McMartin thing started, the McMartin preschool thing, and of course that was
That's
one of the first really big
embarrassment.
salvos. Yeah, oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't only that. I mean, it was that, and there was a whole bunch of them in Massachusetts. There was there was a book. That was it was an exploitation book. It was this girl who supposedly had remembered all kind of satanic abuse when she was a child. I don't remember. It was so and so remembers. I don't remember the name of the girl. Jessica remembers or something like that. I don't remember her name. But Um, so that, I mean, that fed it, that fed that panic. But without that big, I mean, you got to kind of look at it this way. The daycare paranoia was sort of like a big heap of dry tinder. It was just waiting for a spark. And the satanic panic gave that spark to it.
That's so, like, the neuroses that's so nakedly, like, clearly about people's personal issues, but it turned into this concrete thing where, like, police departments were giving PowerPoints about how you recognize a satanic murder and stuff.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I was teaching. I taught for 2 years when I first got out of college, and this was in the '80s, and I was teaching I was doing a chapter in speech class on media, um, basically media literacy, kind of a chapter, And at the time, it just so happened it was like a ready-made thing, and I asked my students, I said, "Did any of you see the Channel 4 news last night with Bill Elder?" And Bill Elder had been kind of a local Walter Cronkite. He had a sort of a good reputation, and
Mm-hmm.
the Satanic Panic, he went off the frickin' deep end. He was, in this particular story I was referencing to my students, he was claiming his garage had gotten broken into. And he swore that the reason his garage had gotten broken into was it was Satanists doing it to try to get him because he had done a report on news about Satanists.
Oh, I see.
And as I said to the students, I said, now what seems more likely to you? That a gang of Satanists came to his house, tried to break in, and then got scared and ran away? Or that somebody was trying to steal his lawnmower?
Yeah.
And so I remember talking about this in class because it was current events at that time, the whole thing. And recently we rewatched. I had never seen the X-Files. I made reference to him a little while ago, but the X-Files premiered in 92, 90, 93,
Something
I
like that.
guess,
Yeah.
93. And so I had never seen it back then, but I was seeing it now. And the first two seasons, the 93 and 93, 94, 94, 95 seasons, um, they were both, they definitely dabbled in some Satanic Panic stuff.
Yeah.
And I
So that's
pointed it out to my friend. I was like, "Oh, look at this! They're doing, they're doing this, recovered memories and satanic cults and all that stuff." But by the third season, so that would have been the 95, 96 season, Scully is poo-pooing the satanic cults. So it's like that's where the shift happened. Somewhere in there was where the panic died.
so in that universe, they're more likely to exist than in ours,
Well,
after
sure,
all.
right? Because in their universe, they have werewolves and witchcraft and demons and aliens and all coexisting in one world, So
But
it's yeah, of course in their universe it's not so far-fetched. But we live in a more boring universe.
we do, and a world where possibly the X-Files was bad for humanity as a whole, even though it was a lot of fun. There's a lot
Yeah,
of vaccine stuff I remember with smallpox being
there
used in
was.
this.
There was
Yeah.
that's another thing I pointed out too. I said, "Oh, look at this. This is the whole vaccine paranoia," you know. Although even in the show, they didn't say that the vaccine was fake. It's
Right.
just that they used the vaccine as an excuse to also put in a chip, right? But that's what that's one of the most popular vaccine paranoia beliefs, right? That they're injecting a microchip in with the vaccine. Isn't that one of them? One of
I
the
believe
crazy?
so, and
Yeah.
variations on that, like, yeah. Well, I was going to ask you about how terrible the cops are, but in general, in the world we actually live in, where people have jobs and sometimes they're not joyous every time, what, like, how what is the best way to just protect sex workers from exploitation and danger that, can happen to anyone?
I hate to sound like a broken record, but decriminalization. Really?
And not legalization, but
No,
decriminalization?
no,
Mhm.
no, no. See, my friend Mistress Matisse, she has a good way of dividing it. You know, she says when you talk about things like that are inanimate objects, you can talk about legalization and decriminalization, you know, in one way. But when you talk about the behavior of people, you have to use different terminology. You know, I think personally, I kind of wish that they had sort of settled upon one set of meanings for those words across prohibition, because it does get confusing. Because people sometimes think, people who really are in favor of sex worker rights, you say, well, you know, we support decriminalization, and they'll go, what? Not full legalization? Like as if legalization was better.
Right.
For drugs, you have to look at it this way. You can say, now it's not very effective, as we all know, but you can still say, this drug has no usage. If we find you with it, we're going to attack you. We're going to, you
Mhm.
know, we're going to throw you in jail, all that kind of stuff. You know, we don't believe weed has any use, so therefore, if you have weed, boom, boom, cut and dried. But that's not the case with sex work, is it? Because what you're doing there is sex itself is not illegal.
Right.
You're criminalizing a motive. It's a thought crime. You're saying because you had bad thoughts when you had sex, because you wanted dirty old profit instead of nice, clean, wonderful love, then you're bad. You know, because if you had had thoughts of love when you were doing this, that would be okay. But because you had thoughts of profit, you're a criminal. And so you just can't enforce that the same way as you can enforce an all or nothing drugs are bad, you know.
Right.
Um, and
It
once again, neither one is effective. But in principle, in theory, you could say nobody is allowed to have X if it's an object. It
you
doesn't
know,
work so well when it's a human behavior, which is acceptable in other contexts.
I mean, pornography being legal and prostitution and escort not doesn't make any sense,
No, it
like,
makes
at
no sense at
all.
all. No, it makes no sense at all. The reason that's true, though, is because it's because of the First Amendment.
Mhm.
Because the the porn folks managed to argue cleverly and well that it was a
Mhm.
First Amendment issue, and that, of course, is not the case with in-person sex work. There's no First Amendment issue there. Um, none that anybody has been able to tease out anyway. You know, I
But
mean, you know, to me, it comes under a self-ownership issue, but that apparently is not respected in our society. You know, there's precedence to the opposite. There's precedence that the state does have the right to abrogate your self-ownership. Um, I mean, we can discuss that. We can say that they're bad precedents, they're evil precedents, but the fact exists that they are precedents. They are there. You know, the state does have, you know, does reserve the right to inflict violence upon you for doing certain consensual things I don't like.
sure does.
Uh, What when people, it's easy to get confused. I think the best way I ever heard it stated was an Australian reporter who once said, under legalization, sex work is still conceived of as a crime for which the law makes allowances.
Right.
So, for example, in Nevada, a lot of people are very, very surprised to discover that the Nevada police are some of the most aggressive anti-whore police in the whole country.
I did not know that.
Yes, very, very aggressive. And people are like, but it's supposed to be legal. It's like, no. Getting a license, which requires submitting all your information to the cops, being fingerprinted, having a background check, paying a fee, and being examined by a state-employed doctor. All these things are necessary to be given a whoring license that you can only use in brothels owned by politically connected cronies way out in the desert, far away from civilized people.
Right.
You
Not
can't
not in
contaminate
Vegas.
them
I
with your
didn't know
whore
that.
cooties. As a result, only roughly 1% of all sex work in Nevada takes place in the brothels.
Wow. Okay.
1%.
Mm.
That's a 99% non-compliance rate. That would not be viewed as successful in any field.
Mm.
99% non-compliance? Holy crap. And the arbitrariness of it can be demonstrated by the fact that in Nevada, working in a brothel is the only legal way to work. In Canada, just 1,000 miles away, working alone is legal. Working in a brothel is not.
Oh yeah.
It's the same in Europe, right?
Mm.
In England, because under the English common law tradition, brothels are bad. Right across the channel in Amsterdam, brothels are the only legal way to do it. And so this is the thing. You get all these crazy arbitrary rules. For a while in Victoria, in Australia, when they had legalization, they recently changed to decrim, but under legalization, the government even controlled what kind of pictures you could put in your ads.
Oh my.
So it's legal, but you can't show your tits in an ad.
That's very strange.
It is strange, So when people struggle with the whole concept of legalization versus decriminalization, or especially because you'll get these smarty pants types that'll go, well, there's no such thing as an industry that isn't regulated. And I'll say to them, we have health laws about restaurants, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there are health code inspectors. What happens when a health code inspector comes to a restaurant and discovers a violation? What does he do? He writes a report, he hands it to the owner or the manager, and he says, you need to have these things fixed by the next time I come back, which will be, let's say, Monday. And you need to fix these things or I'm going to fine you. What he does not do is sneak in with a bunch of hooligans that are his assistants, suddenly jump up in the middle of dinner and arrest the owner, the wait staff, the kitchen staff, and all the diners, and parade them on a perp walk in front of the media and put their pictures on the front page of the paper saying, evil diner people. No, you don't do this, right?
Yeah.
And that's the difference between legalization and decriminalization right there. Restaurants essentially in our society are decriminalized. They are not treated in a criminal fashion. Violations are civil violations. They are not criminal violations. And in a place with decriminalization, when you have brothels, that's how the brothels are handled.
Yeah.
You can have code violations and things like that, but they're not handled by cops running in and arresting everybody. They're handled with, hey, you don't, your smoke alarms aren't working, your panic button is not working. You're supposed to have this many rooms for this many girls, or whatever rules they have. I don't know all the rules. And this system works. So you have things like a few years ago in New Zealand, there was a brothel owner who thought he had the right to test drive any girl he wanted without paying them. He was sued for sexual harassment. The girls won.
Good.
Because it is sexual harassment, right?
Yeah.
It is the same saying, hey, you have to fuck me or give me a blowjob or whatever, and I'm not going to pay you. It would be like a restaurant owner saying to a waitress, well, you have to come and serve dinner at my house, but I'm not paying you.
Right. Yeah.
It's not legal. It's not allowable, and under a decriminalized system, people can see that. When there's no cops involved, throwing cops in muddies everything.
I know you've talked about cops raping sex workers.
Yep.
And you've alluded to it being more common than I think most people would ever think.
It's extremely common. It is extremely common. It is in every place in the world that has ever been studied where sex work is not completely legal. In other words, ignoring New Zealand and the Australian states where you have decriminalization. Just pay attention to all the other places in the world where sex work is at least partially criminalized, is to some degree criminalized. In every one of those places, the greatest danger for sex workers is cops. Clients, street ruffians, pimps, all that kind of stuff, they're all distant seconds and thirds and fourths after cops. Cops are the major hassle. And it can be incredibly petty. Like one example I like to use is in Queensland. An Australian state, sex work is legal, but it's legalized. It's not decriminalized in Queensland, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, they're trying to work on fixing that, but for right now, one of the arbitrary laws about sex work in Queensland is that no two sex workers can work together outside of a brothel.
What?
So, right. So one of the very common things, one of the most common client fantasies is for what we call a duo. He wants two women at the same time because this is not an unusual male fantasy.
Yeah.
Some guys will do that by calling one girl and saying, do you have a friend you can bring with you? Other guys will call the two girls separately. They'll pick them themselves. So what the Queensland cops do is they pose as a client. They call two different girls. When the girls get there, they arrest them for working together.
Oh my God.
So they invent, because they have this arbitrary law, where cops have an arbitrary law that gives them permission to brutalize somebody, they will use that law. If you give them any loophole, they will take it.
I was going to say, what is the supposed reasoning behind the two girls are not allowed? Like, what is...
Pimping. They charge them with pimping each other.
Okay. Oh my God.
Yeah. Oh, any kind of third party under the systems where pimps are criminalized, which is basically the entire former British Empire. So the UK, Canada, India, several African countries, and all those places, pimping is illegal. And so what they do is, the way they interpret pimping is, if you get any money from a sex worker, you're a pimp. So if you rent an apartment to a sex worker, you're a pimp. If you are a maid cleaning up a sex worker's apartment, you're a pimp. If you're a driver driving her to calls, you're a pimp. If you're her husband and she contributes to the household in any way, you're a pimp. In India, for a while, until there was a huge outcry about it, they were even persecuting the adult children of sex workers who were college students that the sex worker was still supporting so that they could go to college and better themselves. They were trying to charge these students because they were over 18, so they were adults. They were taking money from a sex worker that the money, that was their mother, that she was giving it to them. They were charging them with pimping.
Some of those laws, you couldn't punish the sex worker more if you knew that was your intention.
That's right.
It's
Oh,
baffling.
it's baffling if you believe that the main purpose of law enforcement is to help people. It's not so baffling when you realize that cops are pretty much thugs. I mean, they like brutalizing people and they look for excuses to do it.
Yes, but to me, it's exactly the same. It's pretty close to you don't want to disincentivize calling the cops because your friend is overdosing on something. So if you really are worried about some big scary client assaulting a woman, well, we got to make it so she never feels comfortable calling the cops. In a world where they actually might help you, that's the entire setup. It's as if they actually do not want to protect the women, or
Well,
if
they
they
don't.
just,
No,
yeah.
they don't.
But
They
some of them think they do, though. I think, don't they?
well,
They tell
they
themselves they're
claim.
helping.
They claim,
Yeah.
but claim and think are not the same thing, right? I mean, in other words, it's one thing to say, it's one thing for the cop to go and stand in front of the VFW Ladies Auxiliary and say, "We're trying to help these poor victims." That's not what he says when he's with his buddies.
Sure. Yeah.
And the fact and the rapes are a perfect example of that. The whole idea of cops raping sex workers and then calling it gathering evidence.
Oh my god.
Oh, because otherwise, how would I know? So they I'm saying, they basically lead her through it, and yeah, this is something that young sex workers, we have to kind of drum it into their head. It's like there is no magic formula to protect you. A cop can fuck you to completion. A cop can get a blowjob to completion, and then slap the cuffs on you.
Hollywood lied about that.
Yep. Yeah.
There's a
Well, a lot of people,
yeah.
it's not so much that Hollywood lied about it. It's that it's a common belief, even among
Yeah.
sex workers. Just like it's the same thing of like drug users. I don't know if they still believe it, but they used to believe that if you asked a cop if he was a cop, that he could not lie. And of course, that's
Right.
nonsense. They lie all the
Yeah.
time.
It's a very
They lie
strange
right
myth.
to your face. They tell you they're not a cop. And so that's the thing. And you have these situations where an ordinary people, when they hear about these cases, they're outraged, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
This is normal, decent people. When they hear that, they're astonished, and they're especially astonished when they hear that some states, among them Pennsylvania, Indiana, and Florida, were famous. Now, I think this is less true nowadays, but for a while, those three states especially would spend state funds and go to court to defend a cop who had been reported for raping a sex worker. And their excuses would be many and manifold. It's like, oh, well, but they're so sophisticated that the only way we can get them, we can catch them, is by actually getting them in the act and all this kind of stuff. There was a guy in Indiana, John Daggy was his name. He was a detective or something. And he actually had a friggin' sideline flying around from Pennsylvania and Florida to testify at the trials of cops who were being accused of rape, So basically to tell the jury and the judge that no, this is what we need to keep public order.
What a loser! My God,
Yeah, it was
what a
his
way to make your
sideline.
living.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean it's. But this is how, you know, and Hawaii a few years ago, Hawaii basically had it spelled out
I
in their
remember that.
law that it's not
Mhm.
rape if the rapist is a cop and the rape victim is a sex worker, it's not rape. They more or less had it spelled out, and some politician with a particle of human decency ran into this law and said, "Holy shit!"
Yeah,
and tried to change it, and the police actually tried to oppose, you know, and it became a big thing in the news for a while, you know, but people, of course, were thinking this was unique to Hawaii. It's like, no. Most states don't spell it out as clearly as Hawaii did, but it was not unique to Hawaii. This has happened in your state too, folks, you know.
yeah. Um, I wanted to ask you. There's a lot of like I think we know your general response to things like the Nordic model as
Oh,
like this
yes.
alleged solution, which is it's basically just criminalizing Johns.
Well, supposedly, but I mean, you got to look at it as the actual philosophy of the Nordic model basically is that when it comes to sex, women are eternal adolescents and
Mm-hmm.
men are our moral superiors. And that may sound harsh, but it is built exactly like statutory rape laws. So when I first got to college, I was 16 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I had skipped a grade, and my birthday is in the autumn. So I was 16 for a couple of months before I turned 17. Age of consent in Louisiana is 17. When I first got to school, I was definitely screwing guys who were much older than me, you know, grad
Mm-hmm.
students and all that. None of those guys guessed that I was really only 16. They might have avoided me if they had known it. But because I was in college, they assumed I was at least 17 or 18.
Right.
And I came across as very mature. But if we had been caught and somebody had decided to press charges, guess what? I would have been considered legally a child. Doesn't matter whether I was the one who initiated, doesn't make a difference that I didn't tell them the truth. None of that would have mattered because it's a strict liability offense. The guy is guilty, the girl, or the underage person, who's usually a girl, but not always, you know, the underage person is considered basically blameless, and the older person is considered to be their moral superior. More or less, the so-called victim is too young to know better, but the person who is older, you should definitely know better. You're old enough to know better, and that's what the Swedish model basically says: is that, oh no, well, women can't be expected to have any kind of moral judgment. If a guy waves money at them, well, obviously they lose all self control, fall over on their back, and spread their legs. Obviously, it must be the guy's fault. To the
Yeah,
point
it's
where there was a big raid. This is back in the early teens. There was a big raid in Sweden, and one of the guys who was convicted was 17. The sex worker
wow.
he was caught with was in her 20s. So a
Wow. Okay.
17-year-old boy was judged the moral superior of a 20-something-year-old woman because this boy was held responsible for her conduct. And people don't see this as being, it's like you when you say a situation like that, that is not helping the woman. That is
No.
establishing the woman as a moral imbecile. It's establishing her as a permanent child.
Yeah.
And if there were some women out there maybe who might say, "Oh, well, I'll take it in order to keep the cops off of me," but the cops aren't really off of you because you can still be arrested under pimping laws if you work with another girl, if you drive somebody. If you Norway had a thing they literally called Operation Homeless, where they mailed the landlords of sex workers and told them, "Do you realize that you can be prosecuted for pimping because you're letting this hooker stay in your apartment?" With the express intention of getting them evicted. There were girls who were thrown out of school. They were college students who were thrown out for moral issues, moral whatever they want to call it. There were ladies that had their kids taken away. All this kind of stuff. This is not because you can't file charges, prostitution charges specifically. That is not the same thing as saying that there's not something the government can do to you, because there's plenty they can do to you. They just
Yeah.
can't. They just can't hit you with specifically a prostitution charge.
I've also seen people say that even if it's not an official Nordic model, if they crack down on Johns too much, can endanger the girls because in order to make money, they have to be less discerning because they have fewer clients to choose from. And they might pick
Exactly.
somebody who doesn't smell right, who seems a little. Yeah, so it's as if they want. Maybe they do want the women to suffer.
They do. No, they absolutely do, and they've even admitted it when the after 10 years of the Swedish model, the Swedish government did a report, the Skarhead report. Skarhead was the name of the parliamentarian. I think it was Anna Skarhead was the parliamentarian or parliament member who presided over this report. And one of the conclusions they came to was, and I can't quote it exactly, and it's translated anyway from the Swedish, but more or less something to the effect of a rise in violence against sex work or against prostitutes. They said prostitutes, of course, was observed. However, this must be viewed as a positive, since the purpose of the law is to discourage prostitution.
Oh, I see. Well,
Violence against sex work, increased violence is good because we're trying to scare those dirty whores up from selling their ass anyway.
and that just sounds like every other sort of the most authoritarian religiosity. Scandinavian's supposed to be like more critically thinking about. I mean, and less puritanical than America or something, but they're still. It sounds like it's
Yeah,
really
they're
the
not.
same thing.
No, they're not.
Yeah,
You look at their laws on drinking and on smoking and things like that. They're pretty puritanical.
alas. Um, I was going to ask you. You were talking about. I'm interested in youth liberation stuff, and frequently it's just a creepy man. If you're talking about age of consent being sort of arbitrary, but there's a very real philosophical thing there.
There is.
I don't know how you like. Certainly, older teens. There's a very clear sort of gray area of like they're going to be sexual probably, but they might need more protection or something. How would you sort? I mean, I don't know how you see the state dealing with that, or with the sex work industry dealing with that.
It's well, for sex workers, I'll tell you this. When I had my escort service, if a girl that was applying to work for me looked young and I did not believe she was at least 18, I would ask to see her ID.
Yeah.
And there was one case where I said, you can't be 18, because she had a baby face. I mean, she looked 16 maybe, you know.
Yeah.
And she says, no, yes, I am. I said, let me see your driver's license. So she shows me her driver's license. She was 1 week short of her 18th birthday. And I told her, I said, if you are serious that you really want to do this job, you call me back next week when you turn 18, and then we can talk. And you know, she called me right back. She called me back 1 week later. She called me back. So it wasn't just an impulse, you know. And she turned out to be a pretty good girl too. Actually, she was really good, because she actually listened. You know, I gave her advice, and she actually took my advice. You know, she
Yeah.
didn't just blow me off and yeah, okay, grandma. You know, it wasn't like that. No. Um, and so I think personally, I did an essay on this years and years ago. I want to say 2011, 2012, where I said, if you have a decriminalized system and you have some, you know, some rules, I said, yeah, you definitely can establish, if you're making laws, you can say, hey, brothels or escort services are not allowed to hire anybody under 18. I said, but be aware that when you do that, if you have teenage runaways, you are giving them no option but street work.
Right.
Is that, I think that's one of those situations where there is no good answer.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, you know, if I were Glinda, the Good Witch of the North, and I could wave my wand and you know, fix people's lives, I mean, yeah, I'd make it to where no teenager ever felt that they had to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But in the real world, what do you do? I think in the real world, what you do, I think, they pretend that they have what they call these safe harbor laws, where we won't prosecute anybody who's a, quote, sex trafficking victim, close quote, which in the United States automatically includes anybody under 18, because that's the way the law is written. That even in the absence of any victimization, you're a victim, because we said so.
Mm-hmm.
If you have that situation, if those laws were written well and followed in practice, that would be one thing, but they're not. They only apply to so-called perfect victims.
Right.
Basically, to get the protection of the law, you've got to be a middle-class white girl who was kidnapped from your bedroom. If you are a poor black girl who had run-ins with the police before, like a shoplifting arrest, a vagrancy, trespassing, all these things they throw at homeless people, you know. If you've got that in your record, forget the so-called safe harbor. We're going to prosecute you just like anything else. So once again, if you have a decriminalized system where sex work itself is not a crime, and you, let's just say that you were that you had an actual police department that was actually by some miracle run by somebody who was not a total authoritarian lunatic, and it really wanted to help people. I mean, if prostitution's not a crime in the first place, you don't have to to use that excuse to prosecute these girls, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
but what do you do? What do you do? What do you do if you don't want them to? Well, then you're going to have to provide the cash, won't you? If you want to say we don't want people under 18 doing sex work, the fact of the matter is sometimes people under 18 do run away from home, and they do need to support themselves in some way. If you don't provide that way, they're going to do what they need to do. And the majority of those teenage runaways, it's not I mean, like when I was a kid, the joke, I mean, the idea of a kid running away from home was treated as a joke. It was usually because the in TV shows or whatever, the parent had said something mean to them, and so or didn't want to listen when little Bobby was reporting something that really was true, but the parents didn't believe or whatever. It was that kind of situation, right? Well, in reality, of course, when a kid runs away from home, it's usually much more serious than that. Kids don't run away
Mhm.
from home on a whim. Kids don't run away from home to join the circus. For God's sake, they run away from home because their dad is molesting them, or because their mom is a drunk and their stepdad is molesting them, or because their parents are Christian fundamentalists and discovered they were gay and want to send them to conversion therapy. That's the
Mhm.
reason kids run away. They run away because there's some situation at home that makes it intolerable, that makes living on the street more tolerable than having a nice warm bed and regular meals, you know. Because if the price of the nice warm bed and regular meals is being raped by your dad, some people are going to choose, that they'd rather live on the street.
Yeah.
And
Compared
that's a
to what
sad
is always the
situation. That
question.
sucks. That totally sucks. I am, again, I'm not Glinda Goodwitch. I don't have any solution to this. How do we stop this kind of abuse? How do we stop this? I don't know. Smarter people than me have thought a lot about this, and we don't know. But I do know one thing: adding another level of criminalization to it, giving cops an excuse to rape the underage sex worker and get away with it, this is not making it better.
That is a good rule of thumb, that's for sure. Um, I wanted to ask just a little bit about, I mean, your story about the girl who was almost 18 is a good
Yeah.
example, but the difference between being an escort and being a madam, I feel like, again, with the squirrely people, like there are people who would find being a madam somehow more dubious than being a call girl. There's this weird like what did you think, what did you consider sort of your responsibility when you were a madam, like what.
The same as any other business owner. I mean,
Mm,
I felt what we did was the way it was done in those days in New Orleans. Client would call the number that's in the phone book. We talk to him, we tell him the price, find out what he's looking for. The person answering the phone, you want to be somebody who has experience. You don't want to be, a beginner. So it's going to be like, it was me, it was my partner Grace, and it was my day operator, and we were all pretty experienced. So we're listening to the guy when we're talking to him. If we felt if something set off an alarm bell, it stopped right there.
mm-hmm,
The call does not get passed on. But if we didn't see any problem, we would call a girl that we thought would fill the bill. So like the guy's looking for, oh, I really don't want a young girl. I want somebody a little bit more mature. It's like, well, I have a lady in her 30s. Will that work for you? Yes, it'll work for me. Okay. So I call up, the girl. I tell her about the guy. Okay, this is his story. He's staying at this hotel. This is my impression of him. Then she calls him and she feels him out herself.
mm-hmm.
If she doesn't feel comfortable, she can call me back and say, nah, that guy's skeevy. I'm not going to see him. And usually in those situations, I would ask them, do you feel like it's personal or do you feel like it's him? Because,
Mm-hmm.
like, for example, there was some cases where, like, I was one time I remember where a girl called up, um, where I called the girl up, I gave her the guy's name, and she goes, oh shit. She goes, I can't see him. I'm like, why not? She goes, because he's my best friend's dad.
Oh no.
And I'm like, oh yeah, okay. Definitely you cannot go see him. But so it was perfectly okay for me to give the call to somebody else. There was nothing intrinsically wrong with him.
Right.
She just couldn't see him. And I remember a case where one of the agencies I worked for called me up, and the guy said, the owner said, he goes, I kind of get a funny feeling out of the guy. He goes, but I felt like it was just that he didn't like talking to another man. So he said, so I kind of feel like I want to give my most experienced girl a crack at it. So he warned me about his feeling, but he also put it in context.
Mm-hmm.
And as it turned out, I called the guy, and it really was just, he felt nervous discussing this topic with another man. When he was talking to a woman, he was fine. And I went and saw him, and there was no issue. But so you had that kind of thing. Also, I had a lawyer on retainer. And so the two times, once was me and once was another girl, where we missed it, where there was a sting and it was a cop and they did get arrested, I was able to call my lawyer up, send him right down to bail her out.
That's good.
Yeah. So, I mean, we took all precautions we could.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't lie to people, right? When a girl is applying to work for you, you make very clear to her what's going on. It's like, you know what's expected here, and you know that this is not legal.
Mm-hmm.
And you make it very, very clear to them. No, just in case you're laboring under some kind of delusion, that this is legal. It's like, no, this is not legal. Because you do have people. I had people, folks I've known who worked in Vegas against similar thing, right? Said, oh yeah, they had girls all the time that thought it was totally legal. And it's like, nope.
I mean, maybe
Nope.
before the internet, there's a little more excuse, but you still should probably check.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when I had my service, the internet was young,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, the internet had only been around really for in popular form. What was it, like 95? I think it was like the
Yeah,
internet really kind of broke out.
that was the
But even then, at first, most
commercialization.
people didn't have it at home. Most people went
Mm-hmm.
to internet cafes and things like that, And it was mostly young people. It was mostly not older folks. So when I was seeing guys in the early aughts, a lot of them were just relying on phone books. A lot of them didn't have a laptop. They didn't have anything like that.
Oh my gosh, I had is there any I was thinking about both the SESTA and FOSTA and kind of sex workers as the canary in the coal mine for other rights violations.
Oh, sure.
Um, I mean, I think that's pretty easy to see if you follow any sex workers on social media or anything. I don't know if you like. Do you consider sort of your fellow sex workers like a political force? Like, is there sex worker solidarity and stuff?
I think it was Margot St. James that said uh, something like politicizing a hooker is the easiest thing in the world. Uh, Not a lot of sex workers just want to do their job and fade into the woodwork, right? They want to do it while they're in college, and then they want to put it aside when they get their degree and never
Right.
talk about it again. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that at all. I have had in my career, you would not believe, Lucy, how many girls have come up to me and apologized to me, or they've written me and apologized for not being out. And I always tell
Okay.
them the same
Yeah.
thing. You do not have to ever apologize to me or anybody else for not being political. Your life is your life. And they say, but you, blah, blah, blah. And I go, no, 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 no. Number one, I'm estranged from my family. Number two, I'm old. So I don't have a career ahead of me, you know. And it's and number three, I can't have kids. I'm sterile. So I don't have, there's no family to upset. There's no possible children that could get taken away. And there's no future career that I might be torpedoing. For me not to speak out would be questionable, right? Because it is so much safer for me, socially speaking, not legally, but socially. But if you're a young woman and you just graduated with your psychology degree, and you might be getting married one day and you're in good terms with your family and you could be having kids, I don't blame you for one nanosecond for not wanting to skyline yourself. That is just not, that is not a thing. But that having been said, a lot more young women now are coming out and saying, nope, I'm a sex worker. I've done the sex work, and I think part of the reason for that is because it's so easy to out people on the internet. I guess a lot of maybe the
Yeah.
younger ones just figure they're going to out themselves before somebody else does it.
Yeah, you'll see like nasty New York Post is always the one doing it. Like some random paramedic is
Oh
secretly
yeah,
on OnlyFans and they make it a story. It's very gross.
right, right,
Um,
yeah. It's like right because she wanted to be. It's her body, and she wants to do that. And it's you even have these situations where you kind of feel sorry for the person, but at the same time you're like, well, like I want to say with the whole revenge porn thing, and I've said this before, of saying,
mhm.
why are we making it illegal to post pictures because there's some presumption that a nude is automatically wrong? Why don't we
Right.
instead kind of fight the idea that nudity is something to be ashamed of? I mean, maybe that's a little bit utopian on my part, but at the same time, I'm like, yeah, as soon as you start arguing that, well, you should have known better because she was nude in the picture or whatever, it's like, not necessarily. I mean, consent is the issue here, not the nudity,
Mhm.
right? I
Right.
mean,
That's true.
if you
Um,
post a pic, if it's, why should it be legal to post a picture of, let's say, a woman who's a public figure of some sort or a semi-public figure doing something that could be embarrassing in some non-sexual way, like I don't know, going into some sort of suspect business or something. If you caught here's an example. If you caught a picture of that paramedic like you were talking about coming
mhm.
out of a nightclub, obviously sloshed to the gills, that's legal to print that, but it's not legal to print a picture of her just happening to be naked. You see what I'm saying? It's kind of
Yeah.
weird. I mean, nudity is not uniquely
Yeah.
humiliating.
I don't know what's harder to fight against, because I guess in your own mind you can make that switch and think, why is this, you know, why is the nudity
Well,
so
it's also
humiliating,
easy for
such a
me to say
tragedy?
because
But
I mean, I've never had a particular problem with nudity, so for me, it is. I guess more. I guess that's less muddy for me. You know what I'm saying, than it is for I think most people who have been raised to feel that nudity is humiliating in and of itself.
And is that worse in America than I don't mean to keep praising Europe, but like we sometimes we do
Well,
seem
I mean,
particularly we're insane about breasts, at least, certainly.
I asked an Australian friend of mine once, what is the deal? I mean, I said, in a lot of ways, the United States and Australia are very similar. They're both former British colonies. They both had a white settler population that came in and displaced the Aboriginal population rather than
Right.
enslaving them like in South America, right? Um, there's a lot of similarities. So why are countries so different when it comes to sex work? And she said, "Oh, she goes, it's because you got all the Puritans and we got all the criminals."
Oh yeah, that's
I
true.
I guess she's right, I suppose, to a degree. I mean, the U.S. does have that really strong Puritan strain.
And it's fighting against what we like to think of ourselves as the Wild West individual types, and like sometimes I think America will be a disaster just because we can't reconcile that and we don't
But
admit
that's
how.
true. No, no, no. I think you're right. I mean, we had um, I can't remember who it was that called it. Was it Sagan? Carl Sagan? He referred to the founding fathers as philosophically inclined revolutionaries. And that's what they were, right? But they were a minority.
Yeah.
I mean, the
Yeah.
folks who wanted the U.S. to be a new type of government, with much more freedom than Europeans were used to. Those guys were in a minority. Most people in the United States would have been perfectly happy just to have another king.
This is the
And
contradiction
no,
with human freedom, I guess.
yeah, some people just aren't. They and I mean, you had even in the original colonial days, right? You had the same folks who were championing the freedom of the United States while still speaking about the idea of God as a king.
Hmm.
So, I mean, you do have a sort of a contrast there, a conflict of there's always been a small number of Americans who are rebellious and freedom loving and wild westy and that that think DB Cooper is a hero and stuff like that. So you have that but they're a minority. The vast majority of people will say shit like there ought to be a law.
They love saying that. That's true.
They love saying that. They love saying. I mean, and it's in subtle form. It's in every damn advertising. I mean, how many times have you seen a dessert that they say something like "so good it should be illegal" or something like that?
Sinful guilt.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sinful, and guilt free. This dessert is guilt free. It's like why should you feel guilt about eating a dessert anyway? It's a dessert. But if you're a Puritan, any kind of pleasure is bad.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's
I've pointed that out before that what I call crypto moralists. A crypto moralist is a person who hides a puritanical aim under health rhetoric. So they talk
yeah.
about how they attack the health problems with cigarettes and alcohol and things like that. But that's not really what they're interested in. They're just interested in stopping people from having fun.
There's
The
also
fact that those things are bad for you is secondary to them.
I think there's also a response to say like the new weight loss drugs or even psychiatric drugs where you're
Yes.
cheating if you're not
Yes.
forced miserable. Like, if
right,
you just take a pill
right,
for it, oh, it doesn't count.
right,
You're supposed to suffer.
right, right. You're supposed to suffer.
Like,
And like, holy shit, folks. You know, these people are really trying to convince people. They're trying to convince their listeners that you could live forever if you only eschewed all pleasure. Now, of
like that
course, if you
sad guy
eschewed
who
all
takes his
pleasure,
son's
what would
blood.
be the point of living forever? But yes, that guy. Yeah, that guy. I saw something
He
some
looks
quote from
miserable.
him a few
He
weeks.
does.
He he says he's miserable. He said something about he he eats only a certain limited diet, and he said something like the last when he takes his last bite for the day, he cries or something like that. And I'm like, dude, you don't have to live like
Man.
this. You're choosing to live like this.
I'm all for experimentation in certain ways, but he's just a one-man misery machine, and he looks it in every profile I've ever seen. So he needs to
Yeah, I mean, he
have a
is,
damn Merkel
and his.
prize.
Oh, it's especially funny because you're getting back to the whole thing of because it is so impossible. You are not gonna live forever, dude. You might add a few years, maybe. Oh, and I'm not even really clear about that. But you are not going to live forever. You are still going to die at the most sometime between your 100th and 110th birthday. At the most,
But I
at
don't
the
wanna.
outside, you know.
Yeah, I don't think I can give up French fries even if I live to 110. Things like that. There is, yeah.
I mean, why
Um.
would you want
Oh my
to?
gosh.
I just don't. The idea of buying a few more years of senility and decrepitude at the end of your life at the cost of having to turn every meal between now and then into an ordeal.
Yeah.
I mean,
I
no,
think some
God,
people
no,
never liked
no.
food that much, but
Or they
so
convince
my
themselves that they
grandma
don't.
was. Some people are
I
kind
mean, I
of
can,
bored by food and they don't like the process, but I don't know if that. I mean, I don't know.
yeah, I mean, some people
Um.
claim they don't like sleep.
Yeah, that's true. Those are the. Yeah, they
This, I
seem
mean, any
miserable
kind
too.
of
It's
thing
true.
you can come up with that is pleasurable, somebody will claim they don't like it.
It's true.
And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that, right? That's harmless. I mean, this is we have the right to our idiosyncrasies. You know, I have the
I would hope
right to
so.
say I do not eat friggin' brassicas. I will not eat broccoli. I will not eat cabbage. I will not eat cauliflower. None of them. And I have the damn right to say that I don't do that.
It's
You
true.
know, and somebody else has the right to say I don't eat meat or I don't eat
I'm
food that
working on
isn't
that.
prepared in a kosher fashion, you know, or whatever. And it's only when we try to impose it on other people. I mean, again, this is not going to be a controversial statement to you or your listeners. You know, as long as we don't try to impose it on other people, be as damn let your freak flag fly, you know. But you don't have the right to push it on me.
Um. Well, you shouldn't. People sure try to create that right,
They sure try, sure they
and
do, and they make up all kind of excuses, right? I mean, when I was a teenager and in my 20s, I hated smoking. I was so anti-smoking, you wouldn't believe. I mean, I was just really, really, you know. But that changed when the government started turning smokers into pariahs, especially with some of
yeah,
the really dubious claims about secondhand smoke and stuff like that, you know. I mean, yeah, if it's like a little cubicle, you know, if you're in an office, maybe you should say smoking's not allowed because these people have to be there all damn day. And in restaurants, I kind of like them saying, okay. But when they got to the point of doing stuff like, yeah, even if you name your business the Smoker's Bar, You still can't have smoking in there. What? And trying to turn them into pariahs. And let's raise the cost of every cigarette, pack of cigarettes to $20 a pack with all the taxes and duties and all that stuff. I mean, that's when I stopped being so anti-smoking and started feeling sorry for them. I'm saying, God damn, leave these people alone, man.
Yeah. There's so many different avenues to try to control people, and people will try every single one.
Every single
Now,
one.
after that,
And
did you ever consider yourself part of the libertarian movement at all? Just because that's a very
not
classic
really.
libertarian in a good way rant.
No, not really. I never, and the reason being because I'm just not a joiner.
Yeah,
I'm not a
that's fair.
joiner. I've always been kind of an outsider, and even when I do things, I tend to not do them in the way everybody else does them. Like, I mean, I mentioned way at the beginning of the conversation uh, that I like D&D. I enjoy Dungeons and Dragons, but I never played it the same way as a lot of other people played it. Like, I never did the thing where you have like a portable character and you show up at like a game store or something and play with a bunch of strangers. Oh God, I could never do that. All my campaigns were closed.
So what do you do?
They were, it was
Okay.
just, it's people who are friends and we're getting together and we're having this game and we're all friends here. And there's no strangers coming in from outside just to play. And then the whole idea too of like playing online. To me, that does not compute. I want to sit
Yeah.
around a table with people that I know that are friends of mine, and we can play, and we can also be silly, and we can joke with each other, and it's a social occasion. So I guess what I'm saying is that even in things that I was kind of a joiner, I was weird. Like I didn't do
Yeah.
them the same way other people did them, you know.
I suppose part of the problems of the libertarian movement is that there were a lot of unjoiners as well. But I've seen you. I keep wanting to call it tweet because I feel like Blue Sky should just say tweet now because
I say
Twitter
tweet.
didn't want to be Twitter.
I say tweet. If they don't like it,
Yeah,
screw them. I'm old. I'm allowed to be cantankerous. Tweet.
it's a Kleenex and thermos. Just like make it a generic. It's fine.
Yeah.
You seem pretty annoyed by the current political situation, and you're certainly
Oh
not
yes.
on team. Well, they're cutting the government, so it's fine. So I don't know if
Well,
you
my I have said several times. If I were a doctor, yes, I would lecture my patients about obesity. I would try to help my patients
Mhm.
lose weight. I would do whatever I could as a doctor to help them lose weight. What I would not do is sneak into their house in the middle of the night and attack them with a chainsaw. You know, liposuction is a careful, sterile, surgical procedure. It is not unplugging everything and seeing what fails.
Yeah.
That's insane. Even if you say, hey, the United States is too dependent on the government, which I do say, you don't stop that by just cutting everything off cold turkey. If you
Except
want to
for Gitmo.
downsize a department, you don't say, let's fire everybody. You say, let's figure out which positions we do not need to hire anybody in for when attrition happens. Oh, here's a position we can eliminate. When this guy retires, oh, you know what? Let's offer that guy to go work in this other department and we can eliminate the position now. But you're not hurting people. This whole thing of like just what do they call it? Move fast and break things. Holy
Yeah.
crap. What kind of juvenile shit is that? When you tear down a building, when you demolish a building, you don't just walk up and throw a fucking gigantic wad of TNT into the front door of the building when everybody's still in it. No, you evacuate the building. Then you remove all the valuable stuff from the building. Then you make a plan to, on a certain day, you're going to dynamite the building in a certain fashion with carefully placed charges to bring it down. And then you cart the rubble away. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There's never a time when random destruction is the preferred course of action. Unbuilding, modifying is not the same thing as just throwing everything out.
Yeah. It's hard to argue against people who who are fine with sort of, let's just hire loyalists to one guy and that'll somehow make the government's badness better.
I
I don't.
don't comprehend. I will never, if I live to be 100, which I hope I don't, I will never grasp how so many people who call themselves libertarians can support dictatorship.
Yeah.
What? Like, that totally does not compute. Or authoritarianism of any kind. They're babbling about open borders and babbling about, I remember a few years ago, there was this whole bunch of libertarian types that were all, I don't recall what it was that set it off, but suddenly all these guys that call themselves libertarian types were attacking sex work with variations on, would you want your daughter to do it?
Oh, sure, of course.
And I'm like, dude, if she's your adult daughter, you got no control over it.
Well, if you're I don't know how much to blame religion, but just, you're
Right,
still kind of property of your father when
but
you're
that's not
adult.
libertarianism,
No, it's
right?
not.
That is not libertarian. Only certain people should have rights, or certain people should have more rights than others, or, you know, none of that is libertarian.
I didn't think so, and yet
And
here we
yet,
are.
and yet, well, I mean, I learned my lesson a few years ago at Freedom Fest.
Oh no.
Um, and I went, and there was a panel, and I was not on the panel. I was in the audience. But a couple of people that I was friends with were on the panel. And it was a panel about basically why pro people who consider themselves pro-life should still be opposed to this new crop of anti-abortion laws.
Hmm.
One of the panelists was a woman who was a pro-life activist. And she said flat out, basically, I hate abortion. I would love to eradicate abortion. She goes, but you cannot do it by making laws like this. This is not going to help anything. At the end of this panel, the line of people lined up at the microphone to lecture as though they should have been on the panel instead. Like, no, the type I'm talking about. They don't have a question.
Yeah.
They just want to be. They want to be on the panel, and they want to. And it was a whole line of them. There was like 10 of them, 10, 20 of them. And the only reason we even got away from these people was that the next people in the room were like, excuse us, it's our turn now. And so the panel was freed from having to listen to too many of those because they had a valid excuse. We got to go, you know. But I mean, I said to myself, and this is supposed to be a libertarian convention?
Yeah. I've met about 4 or 5 people that sound kind of like that woman, and who I actually believe, and I don't think they're bullshitting, and they're usually Christians. And it's, we hate abortion, but like the law's not going to fix this thing. Like, we want to change minds and stuff. About 3 or 4 of them I actually believe it, but it's usually, you know,
Well, the
don't
other
have the
ones were,
laws.
I mean, all the ones that were lining up at the mic. It was not about that. It was all the nonsense of like, well, but you have to be responsible for your own actions, and so if you get pregnant, then you're responsible. I'm like, holy shit! It's like, so what you're saying, dude, is that um, if somebody forgets to fill their car up at the gas station and they run out of gas way out in the middle of the highway and in the middle of the desert and they die of dehydration walking to the nearest gas station because it's West Texas, that they deserve that because they were careless about not filling the car.
Yeah.
Oh, but you don't have the right to end a life because of, it's like, are you a vegan? Because
I
you end
suppose.
lives all the time, man. You
Yeah.
you're eating meat, and they're like, but that's not the same. That's not the same. Like, before the embryo is viable, when there is no brain activity, it's like, genetically speaking, it is human, sure, but it's not a person
No, it's not.
any more than if I cut my finger off that it's a person. It's like, genetically that finger is still human, it's me, but it doesn't have rights, individual rights of its own as a finger, you know?
Well, at some point they pour the soul into the fetus and then it's good to go, I guess. But
I mean, that's very nice, and I personally no, but I personally believe in souls. I'm not an atheist. I believe in souls.
mm,
I don't believe that. I do not believe that a soul is a transparent doppelganger of the person
mm,
that after death goes to live on a cloud, and no, I don't believe this, but I do believe that
mm-hmm,
there is an ephemeral component of the human animal. But every religion that has souls has a different viewpoint about when that soul enters the body.
mm-hmm.
The whole idea that the soul enters at conception, this is not a traditional viewpoint at all.
No,
I've
yeah.
pointed out to people that in the 60s, yeah, I want to say it was in the 60s, a young Jerry Falwell wrote an article about why being anti-abortion is papist.
That's wild.
Jerry Falwell, because at that time the evangelicals had not decided to adopt that as their as a crusade yet. The Catholics were on it, but basically the most Protestants viewed blocking abortion as papistry.
I only found that out like 5 years ago, I think, from John Ronson's podcast called Things Fell Apart. And it
Yeah.
talks about the origin of the real movement towards
Yes.
evangelicals being all about that forevermore. And
Yes.
it's one of those things that's talked about as if it's always been this way since time immemorial. And turns out no.
Well, that's how it is with sex work too. Of course, right? You would be amazed every damn time I give a lecture to, like, especially to, like, students and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that are kind of near the beginning of their journey of life, and I'm like, yeah, guess what? A lot of people, especially Americans, think that it's always been this way. That prostitution has been illegal. Nope.
Mm-hmm.
Barely more than 100 years. you know
I mean,
it, and this is they're flabbergasted when I tell them in January of 1910 prostitution was not criminalized at any place in the United States. Maybe
mm-hmm.
there might have been a couple of exceptions, like individual cities or something like that, but for the most part this was not something that was considered criminal. By the end of 1914, it was illegal in every single state of the United States. And
Wow.
and the
I
reason
didn't
was
know.
because of the same thing that we see over and over again. We saw it with drunk driving laws in the 80s and 90s. We saw it. Do you remember a few years ago? I want to say it was late aughts or mid aughts when suddenly every time you went to a gas pump anywhere in the United States, there was a picture of a scowling cop on the gas pump saying, "You'll lose your license if you drive off away without paying." And I'm like, I wasn't thinking about driving away without paying. But what happens is you get these special interest groups that will back some kind of a crusade, and they write demo laws, and they go from state house to state house to state house, finding politicians who will sponsor that law. And so what happens is within a very small number of years, all 50 states suddenly have the same law or very similar. And that's what happened with prostitution. It's just they fell like dominoes. In 1910, it was illegal anywhere. By the end of 1914, it was illegal everywhere because they all followed the monkey see, monkey do parade. You know, New York made it illegal. Oh, well, we here in Connecticut, we've got to make it illegal now, you know, and so on and so forth.
I mean, part of the supposed progressive movement involved, let me save this poor woman from this terrible life. I mean,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. Well, that was the rationale, certainly.
Sometimes I think people truly do delude themselves,
Oh
but
yeah, of course they do. Absolutely they do. But I don't believe most of those people uh, have titles like senator or president, and I don't believe most of those people are carrying guns and badges.
yeah.
I think the ones that delude themselves are mostly, church going folks, and they have a pretty limited view of morality, a kind of a flat view of morality. Um, and they're stage 4 moral people. They believe in, that laws, that good and evil are determined by a law.
Yeah. That's a still there as an idea.
Well, it's the most conventional viewpoint. That's stage 3 and 4 morality as the majority of humans fall into that belief that this is wrong because a god said it was wrong, or this is wrong because the king said it was wrong, or this is wrong because a democratically elected majority says it's wrong. Um, but there's no deeper underpinning. There's no these people have no idea of an innate morality. They think if there's no law, then it's okay.
Yeah. Um there's an article, I don't know if it was in Liberal Currents maybe, by by a trans woman talking about directly tying trans rights to abortion rights. And
Yeah, I
it's
mean, I
kind of,
can see that. It's right. It's control over your own body.
and drugs, sex work. I mean, you could find a very long list of things, and there's one principle that applies.
Hmm. Yeah, self ownership.
And I
I mean,
wonder,
it's such a
people don't.
basic it's such a
Yeah,
basic concept that I just can't. Well, like I've had people try to argue. People who are intelligent people, but who have bought the idea of libertarian as a bad thing, and they'll say something like, "Well, what about pollution?" I'll go, "Well, what about it?" And they'll be like, "Oh, but if you're a libertarian, then you must not support anti-pollution laws." I go, I'll say to them, "Well, the thing about swinging your fist. Your right to swing your fist stops where my nose begins.
indeed it does.
If you're going to pump pollution into the atmosphere, I think that counts as my nose." You're dumping garbage into the atmosphere. It's like, yeah, I think that's a valid area for laws. you know now
Yeah, and you still have to work stuff out, and energy and society versus the planet, and like we we didn't quite get that one right yet, but
No, we haven't. And of course, part of it is the same thing that caused, I think, a lot of this whole Trumpist bullshit, is that people just can't grasp that there's a line between a necessary a necessary rule or law, in a minarchist type of sense, and let's go crazy. So, in other words, they'll talk about things like the EPA.
yeah,
And where you're like, okay, there's a big old difference to me between a law saying, hey, you can't just go dumping pollution into the atmosphere, or you can't dump sewerage into the ocean. There's a big old difference between that and a law that says, yes, well, by the strictest interpretation of this rule here in this book, this lot that you bought is now a protected wetland. So you can't
yeah,
build on it and you can't sell it. You're stuck. And you're in the middle of a neighborhood with all kind of other people who built their houses. Oh, but they built them before the law was passed.
yeah,
So they're grandfathered in. But now
yeah.
you just bought a $90,000 protected wetland that you can do nothing with. And that's the whole problem, right? Is that you start with something that's reasonable, that's sensible. Don't dump your shit in other people's way, Don't belch smoke into the atmosphere to where nobody can breathe. You start with that, and you end up with telling people that they can't build on their own property because you've decided that there's too much moisture on it.
But I feel like people can't differentiate very well between something like environmental stuff where you have to work things out with other people and the literal, provable existence of you as an individual form and the body that you control and the law, like, the things you should therefore be permitted to do without anyone having a say in it.
Yeah, I don't. To me, that line is bright and clear.
It's most of the time, at the very least. I mean,
But most people don't seem to think it's bright and clear. They
yeah.
really don't, and they start bringing in crap like, "Would you want your daughter to do it?" And I'm like,
It's
when
always
your
daughter
daughter,
too, by the way. It's
always
never.
daughter, it's like when your daughter is under your roof and she's a legal minor, and you are supposed to have some sort of responsibility. It's one thing to say, okay, I don't want you doing that. It's a totally different thing when your daughter is 28 and she decides to support herself that way. And it's like I've said to people before, I'm like, okay, so let's say, let me give you a thought experiment here. Let's say you're a Christian, right? You consider having sex with anybody outside of marriage to be a grave sin. Okay, let's say you sincerely believe that, and your daughter becomes a sex worker. Do you, even if you think what she's doing is wrong, do you want the state to have the power to wreck her life for that mistake so that she can never, never again leave that sin behind? Because it's on her record now forever? Is that what you want? I mean, a few years ago, there was a thing where Pope Francis
Mm-hmm.
made one of his, like an encyclical or something. I can't remember what the exact term, but like a letter to the public,
Mm-hmm.
and said it is wrong to criminalize homosexuality. And a bunch of yahoos, of course, jumped up and said, "Oh, but Catholics say it's wrong." It's like, and his thing was, there's a huge difference between. He says, sin is something between you and God. Crime is something completely different. He says it is perfectly. There is no contradiction between
Right.
saying something is a sin and saying something should not be a crime. I mean, not caring for your fellow man, not helping the needy. That is a sin. But would you want it to be a crime? Would you want it to be a crime that you didn't give a certain percentage of your income to poor people? You wouldn't want that to be a crime.
Well, some people might.
Well,
That's why that pope is okay for a pope, to be sure.
yeah,
And
he's
why
okay for a
he's
pope.
despised by all trad Catholics in the world.
Yes, he is, and that's a plus in his behalf as far as I'm concerned.
Hmm.
Because I was raised Catholic,
I
and
was wondering, yeah.
yeah, my family was pretty. I mean, my if you look at my mom's house, the house I was raised in on Google Maps or the Google Street View thing, you will see that right in front of her house there is one of those Blessed Mother shrines,
Hmm.
with the statue of the Blessed Mother in it. Not unusual in South Louisiana,
Sure.
but fairly unusual for my mom's generation in South Louisiana. It was more something you saw of the generation before her
Hmm.
and earlier. It was, most of the ones of my mom's age and younger preferred to look more secular, you know. But that was my mom, and we prayed the rosary as a family when I was like 10, 11 years old. So yeah, I was raised that way, and I'll be the first one to tell you, yeah, anything that pisses off trad Catholics is good.
I don't know enough about. I was raised amongst acoustic guitar sort of Christians, but I was kind of almost Catholic because my dad was, and I don't quite know some of its ways, so I find it very mysterious and vaguely pagan.
Well, Camille Paglia pointed out that of the Christian denominations, Catholicism is the most pagan.
It feels that way.
It is extremely pagan. It's extremely pagan. I mean, there's all the different pictures, pictures and statues of the saints. They're
Hmm.
basically like pictures and statues of other gods. There's little chapels to them, and there's like, what a scapular is? A scapular is a small. Usually, it's like a picture of a saint that'll have like a relic in it,
Hmm.
like a little tiny fragment of a bone of a saint or something like that, and it's blessed by a clergyman. And this is supposed to be like it's supposed to serve as a protective amulet, more or less. I mean, this is very common in traditional Catholicism, concepts like that. And yeah, they're very pagan. Very, very pagan.
That's at least a better storyline, I think, than the earnest, um, the suburban people, homeschoolers that I was homeschooled alongside and stuff. Like the movie
Yeah.
Saved, basically.
All the well, you've got so many strange. I mean, the whole one thing I think is really funny is the whole idea of that a lot of people think that um, Catholics are more like puritanical, sexually speaking, than other Protestant denominations. And I'm like, oh, you must not have known too many Catholics and too many Protestants because, oh, no. Catholics always have big old families, right? I mean, I was one of five.
Yeah.
And we were not the biggest family in town. The biggest family in
No.
town had, I want to say, 10 or 11 kids.
Yeah, it's always 10 or 11.
Hmm.
And every time I think I really hate the Catholic Church, and I don't care for it, but like the coolest old hippie anti-war protester types, they're so often Catholic. Like
Oh,
there's
absolutely. Look, I
yeah.
am the gentleman that I call Chekhov on my blog. Um, Chekhov went to seminary.
Yeah.
He didn't take holy orders, and I asked him, "Why didn't you take holy orders?" And he said, "Because I thought I would have been a terrible priest." But he was a conscientious objector during Vietnam,
Sure. Yeah.
and when they drafted him, he filed the conscientious objector papers or whatever you got to do, and he spent his time working as an orderly at Walter Reed in Washington. I mean, but that was him. He was anti-war. He he told me one time, and he said something about, "Oh yeah, I remember seeing Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young at an anti-war rally in Golden Gate Park in
Nice.
1968," and I'm
Very
like,
good.
"That's 1968 in a bottle, there, man." You know? But that's
That's
the
good.
thing, right? Yeah, he was very Catholic to the point of going to the seminary,
Yeah.
and very anti-war.
All right. My goodness. We didn't even do a lightning round, which though we hit a lot of the things that are listed here, but
If you
if you
want to do
want
a lightning round, let's do it.
to come with me on the wrapping up experience where we start with the lightning round.
Good.
Okay, well, I mean, San Francisco, punks or hippies?
I'm sorry. Wait. Start back up now.
Punks or hippies?
Hippies.
Okay. um, libraries or universities?
Libraries.
Yes, that's. We definitely hit old school sci-fi author, but who is your favorite one?
Old school.
Mm-hmm.
Heinlein.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, favorite historical sex worker?
Freeney. She was a
Yes, I.
Greek courtesan
Okay.
in the time of Alexander.
All right. Um, Star Trek or Star Wars?
Star Trek.
I, I suspected. And your favorite Doctor, as in Doctor Who?
Fourth.
Okay, the classics, the one who was the default before the new show. Like,
Tom Baker. Yeah, he
mm-hmm.
was.
Do you like video games? Do you?
No, not really.
I didn't
No,
think. I am. I like.
never got into them.
Best concert you ever went to?
Best concert I ever went to was Heart in 1988
Okay.
at the Lakefront Arena in New Orleans.
Favorite animal?
Cats, I think.
Okay. Mine's meowing at the door.
I like dogs too, but I think cats edge them out a little bit.
I know you have pigs too, which I find very
I do.
fascinating.
And a llama.
A llama? I didn't know about a llama. Very
Llama
good.
and chickens, but the chickens are, working animals.
It's aspirational though, still, I think. Someday I'll. Your favorite conspiracy theory? Based on whatever standards you.
Oh, that's a good my favorite. My favorite conspiracy theory, I think, is the the Anunnaki, the reptilians from the planet that used to be that the asteroid belt was originally made of. That the reptilians came to Earth and live among us. I think that's my favorite one.
It's a classic, a modern classic.
Yeah,
We hit a lot of these. Anarchism or minarchism. I mean,
we started with that one.
yeah, we did. Transhumanism or Ludditism. I don't know why. Very
Oh, I'm
extreme.
more of a Luddite. Yeah, I'm more of a Luddite. That's like kind of Star Trek tradition, right? Man versus the machine.
It is interesting to me that you are such a sci-fi person and still have the. I try to fight my Luddite urges sometimes, but I can understand some of them certainly.
Yeah, I think humans, technology should be a tool, not a master.
Can't argue with that.
I am all for, your old-fashioned sci-fi where the heroes can take their spaceship and go and explore way out there, and maybe have adventures or whatever. I am not so much for the, things like Asimov's Foundation, the idea of
Mm-hmm.
this big monolith running all of society. Ooh, no.
Um, one of our editors wanted to ask you if sex workers should ever do like a Lysistrata like strike thing, like a general sex worker strike.
It would be should is a strong word. I think that kind of thing is unworkable.
Yeah, but I
And
mean,
if all of society were Athens in the Golden Age, in the Peloponnesian War era, and we could all get together in one building and talk,
mm-hmm,
maybe we could make that work. But how many women were there in Athens at that time period? Not really a lot. A
yeah,
few thousand. You know, I mean, it was not an immense megalopolis or anything. It was actually a pretty small. We have that opinion of Athens. We think of it as being this one of the great cities, but Golden Age Athens actually had a pretty small population.
I guess I don't have a good sense of what that is at all. But,
I don't know either, but my guess would probably be about 50,000 people
oh, that is very small, isn't it?
by modern standards. Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
picturing 3 guys wearing togas, so that's not big either. But um, is there anything you've changed your mind about in the past, like 1 to 5 years?
I'm too old to be changing my mind in the past 1 to 5 years, but I have changed my mind in the past 10 years.
Okay, we'll take that.
Yeah, yeah. Before, well, I mean, the biggest one is prior to 2014, I was essentially a teetotaler.
Really?
Hmm. I drank very, very little, and I had never used an illegal drug in my life. Not a one.
Wow.
Not
Okay.
once. Not on purpose, anyway. I mean,
Yeah.
I had been exposed accidentally, but no. But in 2014 was when I changed that. Was when I said, nope, I'm going to start exploring this now.
And how has that been for you? Has that been
Been good.
positive?
It's
Yeah.
been really, really, really positive. Uh, edible cannabis really changed my life. Seriously. For
Wow.
one thing, it let me sleep better. um,
That makes
and
sense to me. Sure.
and it also stills the random neuron firing that sometimes used to prevent me from uh, really catching the nuances in a TV show or movie,
Okay.
because
Hmm.
my brain would be all over the place, and so I'd miss things all the time. And with cannabis, when I watch Under the Influence, I catch all these little things that I never caught before. Like The Bride of Frankenstein is one of my favorite movies. I had probably seen it 10 times sober or more. The first time I watched it on weed, I suddenly realized that there's an enormous amount of Christ imagery in The Bride of
Okay.
Frankenstein. I had never picked up on it before because my brain was too busy running all over the place to just take in what was there.
I like to hear this because, as much as you've said that, you know, older people can't change, you're too old to change, but to have maybe casually been a teetotaler and then changed and it been positive, that's nice to hear. That's the opposite of puritanical panic about either one or the other and extremes and stuff.
Oh,
So,
yeah. I have gotten, the tradition, of course, the traditional viewpoint is that as people age, they become more conservative.
mhm.
As I've aged, I've become more radical.
I like that.
Yeah, way more, way more. I
And
mean, I think my 2025 self would probably shock my 1995 self.
and why do you think that's happened though?
Oh, partly my work. And when I say my work, I don't mean sex work, I mean the writing.
Mhm.
Um, Becoming exposed to things and realizing that a lot of things that maybe I didn't realize how abusable they were. like at one time, another one of those things that's changed for me, and this was a little farther back. This was probably like around 2011. Uh, I used to believe that it was okay to have some limits time-wise on abortion.
Okay.
Um, but once I started thinking and really confronting, well, women are not going out at 8 months and saying suddenly, nope, I decided I didn't want this baby. No, if a woman is going to have, an abortion late in pregnancy, there's a reason.
Yes.
And maybe we should trust that reason, or maybe we should leave it between her and her doctor and not the state. But because I had never personally needed an abortion, I had not given it enough thought prior to that time. I never would have been a person who said, "Oh no, 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 no abortion ever, ever." But I certainly used to believe that it was okay to have some reasonable limits, and now I don't necessarily believe that.
Yeah, I actually agree, and it took me a kind of a long time, and for a while I didn't really think about it enough. But it's just one of the myriad things where to put a prohibition on top of it does
Yeah,
nothing except add the misery and multiply the
exactly,
difficulty.
exactly. Oh, and one that I can tell you I was convinced of by Radley Balco
Yes.
was he was the one that made me realize that the way drunk driving laws are enforced is ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's like, why? What's this whole checkpoint nonsense? If somebody is driving drunk, like badly, it's going to get noticed. You don't need a
Yeah.
checkpoint. I mean,
I remember he wrote about that years ago, and that
yeah,
that one is slightly like tricky because theoretically, can you prove it's more potentially dangerous, and yet 1,000 people can do it and nothing happens? And I don't know quite what do you do with that, but like the abrupt checkpoints thing is certainly not the answer I would go for at all.
no, absolutely not.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I got stuck in one of those. It was I was going to I was going over to my first husband's house before we were married. And this is, of course, also before cell phones.
Mm-hmm.
And I got caught. They suddenly decided to do one of these checkpoints, and I was sitting there for over an hour and no way to get out of it because they always block off the street where you can't get around it. And so I'm driving along, and all of a sudden, what is all these cars for? And I look up, and I actually got out of my car to look to see what is this up ahead, and that's what it was. It was a damn DUI checkpoint.
And it does seem cartoonishly authoritarian, and
Oh, absolutely.
if you think about it.
They stole an hour of my life, to say, move along.
Yeah.
Because it was obvious, because again, I was a teetotaler in those days, you know. And this was early in the evening, too. We're not talking about, 11 o'clock at night. This was like 7.
Those are some early drunks. Yeah, that's
Right.
true.
That's what I'm saying. But what are you guys doing?
Oh my goodness. All right, the traditional question of how would I get a cappuccino in your imagined political utopia? We always ask it.
How would you get a cappuccino? Buy it?
With what?
Or make it yourself? I mean, with money. I mean, I believe that media of exchange have a reason to exist.
I would say so.
I don't think the state should be doling out cappuccinos to people. I think in my imagined political utopia, yeah, you buy a cappuccino, and there's no laws saying how strong the cappuccino can be. Because as long as you label it and say, hey, this is some strong ass cappuccino here, that the person knows what they're getting, I have no problem with it.
All right, I'll take it. And do you have any? We talked a lot about media stuff, but a book or a movie that you recommend that someone should check out that kind of is very you. Like something about sex work or something about.
Well, at the beginning we talked about The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. I think that's a
Mm-hmm,
book that anybody who pretends to think about politics really needs to read that.
mm-hmm.
um, and I think people should read Edgar Allan Poe just because he's good.
Okay,
But I
duly
mean,
noted.
as
Haven't
far
really
as,
done that.
as a book, I mean, it's really hard for me to nail down one. Even when I did a column a while back of my favorite books, I cheated by inventing several books that don't actually exist. Seriously, I did, because I
You
love
could recommend one of those, I guess.
no, so I love the Mars series of Edgar Rice Burroughs.
Oh,
Uh,
that's a real classic
it
throwback.
is a real classic. I don't even know if you can say it's science fiction. That's more like adventure. But I invented an omnibus edition of all 11 books. So that's one of my favorites. It doesn't
All right.
exist, but it would have to exist in my ideal universe. So
All right. Well, I will gladly accept that one. So my cat stops crying. Where on the internet can the good listeners find you?
the easiest, well, of course, is MaggieMcNeill.com. That's the easiest. And I'm on Twitter still, um, although it looks like I'm going to be leaving there probably sooner rather than later if it keeps degenerating. I'm on Blue Sky, Maggie McNeill, and that's two L's in McNeill, McNeill. And you can even go on Amazon and you can search Maggie McNeill and you will find 6 books and a movie, or a
Wow.
documentary.
I didn't know that was that many.
And there apparently is also some woman who writes supernatural romances, who is also named Maggie McNeill, but you will know, but I do not write supernatural romances. So when you see that, it's in love with the werewolf or whatever, that is not mine.
As far as we know. This was a lot of fun.
Thank
I'm
you.
beat. And that's a good thing. Maybe we can do it again sometime.
I would love to.
You're listening to the Non-Serviam podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, why not subscribe over on our YouTube channel or on your favorite podcast platform. You can also follow us across social media on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Mastodon. If you're extra interested in seeing this project continue, consider becoming a patron over at patreon.com. But if you can't contribute financially, we still like you a whole lot. And you can help us out just by liking and sharing this episode or any other one that catches your fancy. As always, shout out to our existing patrons. Your support helps us reach a larger audience and helps keep this project alive. Thanks so much.